Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get
NIH,
one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's send Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is
molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't
not.
Get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
Time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible to result in SARS-CoV-2.
Cause the pandemic. We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And you
admit the truth.
And you implying.
Senator Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I am Dr. Angela Rasmussen, Science Chair for the Save America Movement and a virologist. I am here today to go over the Tony Fauci hearing before the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee in the Senate. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, a Republican, has subpoenaed Tony Fauci to appear at this, where he is going to confront him about a number of accusations that he's made with regard to the origins of the SARS coronavirus 2 or COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, for the past 6 years, Tony Fauci and Rand Paul have been going at it about the so-called lab leak that actually did not happen. In July of 2021, actually in May of 2021, and then in July of 2021, Tony Fauci did appear before the HSGAC to testify. And in July, the clip that I just showed was a confrontation that he got into with Rand Paul regarding the origins of the pandemic. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. We have a serious issue in the sense that this hearing that is today is effectively a show trial. I want to be really clear about what the scientific evidence is about the origins of the pandemic. And I've written a number of articles about this that you can go on my Substack and read. I've just written 2 articles for Zeteo.com about this. Those articles are there too, and I'll provide all the links in the transcript for this live when it's over. But the overwhelming body of scientific evidence does not support a lab leak. And I'm just going to go over that very, very quickly. What we do know about the origins of the pandemic is that all of the early cases were, my colleagues and I, actually applied some statistics to this. We found where those early cases lived, and we found that they clustered entirely around the Huanan seafood market, which is on the north side of the Yangtze River in Wuhan, which is a city of 11 million people and is quite large. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is what Rand Paul believes started the pandemic, that's where he believes the lab leak originated from, is about 10 miles to the south on the other side of the river, and it takes about a half hour to get back and forth between the two by train or by car. So all of the early cases, spatially, lived around the market, not around the lab. And what we saw is that as time went by, we think that the virus probably emerged into the human population in late November, early December. As time went by, in January, we started to see increased numbers of hospitalizations, all radiating outward from around the lab, excess mortality that's unexpected, radiating outward from the market, radiating outward from where the market is, not from where the lab is. So we are seeing signs that there is a new epidemic starting, increased hospitalizations. And I should add that this was increased hospitalizations on top of an already peak flu season that had more flu cases than in the past 10 years. And they're still seeing excess hospitalization for influenza-like illness. They're also seeing excess mortality, and it's all radiating outward from where the market is, not from where the lab is. And a lot of people have suggested that, well, the market was identified early on, so maybe it was a super spreader event. Maybe it was, something that was picked up because a lot of cases happened at the market, but that's not where it started. And so we looked at just the cases that had never been to the market. They had no link to the market whatsoever. And we found out that when we looked at just those cases, the statistical association was even stronger. So that's a really good indication that the virus actually started spreading in humans from the market and not from the lab, because the lab is, again, 10 miles away, and we didn't see the same cluster of cases around the lab that we saw around the market. So when we looked in the market, we found there were environmental samples taken. And so we found that the environmental samples that contained genetic material from SARS coronavirus 2 were co-localized with the part of the market in which they sold live animals and live wild animals in this case, including a number of species that were known to be infected with SARS coronavirus 1 when it emerged in 2002. Now, SARS coronavirus 1 the markets were not shut down. It was very clear that it came from the market, and there was actually transmission, multiple spillovers from animals that were being sold in the markets of Guangzhou and Fauci to humans, and there may have actually been some spillover back to the animals as well from infected humans. And this was all genetically traced. This was one of the really cool stories of sort of the advent of our molecular approaches to doing outbreak response. Was the SARS-1 outbreak, in which they were actually able to trace the exact genome sequences that went back and forth between people and animals in these markets. So we know that it was from the markets in SARS-1. And many of these same animals were being sold at the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan. We found DNA from those animals, and I have found in my lab, I haven't had a chance to publish it yet just because this data is really tricky to work with and I want to make sure it's right, but I have found signatures of RNA from the animals, which suggests that the animals were in fact infected because they were expressing genes that are common to coronavirus infection. But I'm still working on it, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, we have a lot of other evidence too. We have the evidence, for example, a lot of people have suggested that maybe SARS-2 was spreading cryptically because there was a lab leak way before late November or December. Maybe there was SARS-2 around this whole time and it's just an artifact that we're noticing it at the market. That doesn't seem to be true either, because they did blood bank tests of normal blood samples, people who just donated blood, And they didn't find antibodies to SARS coronavirus 2 until January, coming up in Wuhan, which suggests that nobody was infected at population scale in Wuhan until January, because that was when it was detected in population level samples. So that's the actual evidence. The only evidence to date that it could have come from the lab, and I do want to mention this because we haven't completely closed the book on the lab, I suppose, in the sense that we haven't found the smoking raccoon dog or the smoking animal that may have transmitted SARS-2 to humans. And by the way, genetic evidence suggests, some of my colleagues did this work, that there were actually 2 spillovers of SARS-2 in the Wuhan market. There were 2 lineages of the virus at the time. One lineage spilled over, and then another lineage spilled over a week or 2 later. So there were 2 independent spillovers, and we actually know this, not because of data that we've gotten from China, but by doing genetic evidence of all of the sequences of SARS coronavirus 2 that those 2 viruses gave rise to, that they gave rise to the SARS-2 pandemic. One of those lineages has become extinct. The other one is continuing to evolve, and it's now what we know is, the 80 millionth iteration of Omicron. But that is, in fact, the evidence about where the pandemic came from. So Rand Paul and former Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard recently released a bunch of documents that they are calling evidence that Tony Fauci covered up the pandemic. So let me just tell you very quickly before we begin, because we're going to start to begin any minute now, what their version of events is. Their version of events is that Tony Fauci funded a NIAID, that's the institute at NIH that he was the director of, funded a NIAID subaward, which is when a person gets a grant or an institution gets a grant, and then there's a collaborator on that grant, and they are issued what's called a subaward so that they have the funds to carry out that work. NIAID issued a subaward to a grant that was awarded to EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance to do some work on coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And some of that work involved finding bat coronaviruses in nature, because the bats that transmit these coronaviruses live in China. And Shi Zhengli, the doctor at Wuhan Institute of Virology who led this subaward, is famous and a very, very excellent scientist, and is known for going out, finding new coronaviruses and characterizing them, partly to determine which of them are potentially a threat for other pandemics. And so one of the ways that you do this is when you find these viruses, you try to see if they can infect human cells. And so that's what they did. And if they can infect human cells, then you also try to see if they might be able to cause disease. Now, they don't infect humans. Nobody does that, as far as I know, and they shouldn't. But they do use what are called transgenic mice. Now, these are mice that express the receptor for the human receptor for the virus, and they did. And Rand Paul says it's a gain of function. And now the hearing is starting, so I'm going to shut up and bring this on board.
All right, that is White House correspondent for USA Today, Joey Garrison. Thank you so much. And let's turn now to, before we turn to the hearing with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who will testify on COVID-19 in front of a Senate panel.
Okay, so I just turned off the sound for this this live stream on CNN because they haven't quite started yet, but they are getting started. Anyways, I'll just finish up very, very quickly what I was saying. So Rand Paul has accused Tony Fauci of doing what's called gain-of-function research. Now, gain-of-function research means juicing up viruses to see if they are more pathogenic or more transmissible in humans. And it's really important for people to understand that at the time that we are talking about here, the time frame in question, the standard was that for gain-of-function research. It was not any of the many other definitions of gain-of-function research that we've heard of, including the one that Rand Paul gives, which is modifying viruses so that they could infect another species, modifying viruses so that they have expanded host range, modifying viruses so that they can produce more virus in cell culture, which he claims makes them more transmissible, but that's absolutely not true. Having more virus in a petri dish does not mean that it has more capability to transmit from one person to another by the respiratory route. And now Rand Paul's up, so I'm going to quiet down.
The virus originated in the lab. The American people deserve answers. The American people deserve to know why dangerous research was funded by NIAID in a totalitarian country in a lab that lacked acceptable safety standards. The decision to fund dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, will likely go down in history as perhaps one of the worst public health decisions. Frankly, the American people deserve an apology.
No,
I
they
hope
don't.
today Dr. Fauci will come clean, admit it was a mistake to fund dangerous research in China,
The research
admit
wasn't
that the
dangerous.
risk of this
The research
dangerous
was really
research
important for
exceeded
human
any
health.
possible benefits, ask forgiveness, and pledge to help our government devise safeguards so a man-made epidemic never happens again.
This is disgusting. He's asking
Instead of
Tony
an
Fauci to
apology,
take a loyalty
you have
oath
for years
or face
avoided
prosecution.
responsibility. Regarding the lockdowns, you argue that you did not personally issue every lockdown order, close
He
every
didn't.
school, or impose every mandate.
And he may have recommended them.
But officials across
but
the
he
country
wasn't the one
invoked
who
your
implemented
authority
them.
to justify these decisions. And you presented your recommendations not as judgments open to debate, but as dictates of science itself. Your
The way
own
that
words
somebody
demonstrate
presents
that you
something when they
understood the
communicate
influence you
something is completely
exercised.
irrelevant to whether or not
On March
it's legal
14th,
or
2020,
correct.
you wrote that the task force recommendations were driven by me, yourself, Deb, and CDC. The next day, you wrote that you had convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close the New York City schools, so you were involved. That same night, Governor Gavin Newsom's chief of staff told you that the governor had decided to close California schools, bars, and restaurants after watching you on television. Presidents, governors, mayors,
okay, so
school
Tony
boards,
Fauci's
corporations,
very
and Congress
persuasive
all
and good
bear
at his
responsibility
job.
for the
Congratulations,
decisions they
Tony.
made.
I would have
The COVID
patted myself
lockdown,
on the
however,
back for
could
that in
never
my
have been
diary
inflicted
too.
without you aiding and abetting the crime. Children lost years of education. Small businesses built over a lifetime disappeared. Patients delayed cancer
wasn't Tony
screenings and other
Fauci's
medical
fault.
care. Families were separated from dying relatives.
And that wasn't Tony
Workers were
Fauci's
ordered
fault.
to accept a medical procedure or lose their jobs.
And that wasn't Tony
Worship
Fauci's
assembly,
fault.
employment, education, and travel were restricted in the name of science.
And that wasn't Tony Fauci's
Well, you did
fault.
not
The
impose
pandemic
every
was not
restriction.
Tony Fauci's
You used
fault.
your public authority to justify them. While you concluded publicly that COVID occurred naturally, your private record tells a different story.
That's not what his private record
In early
says. His
2020,
private
your
record
handpicked
consistently
virologist
shows him
warned that the
after
virus
the
appeared to have
initial
been manipulated
inquiry
in the lab.
into whether or not it was
In a
synthetic.
conference call concerning the
private
origin of the
records
virus,
show
all but two of the
consistently
participants
that Tony
believed
Fauci
deliberate
thinks that the
insertion was
burden of
possible.
evidence lies
Your
with the
concern was
natural
not
origin
merely
in the Juan and
theoretical.
supermarket.
That same week, you led an urgent effort to determine whether your own agency had funded the research related to these experiments
And
that
isn't
were
that
now
what
under
you would
suspicion.
do if that accusation had been made?
Hours
You
later,
would
your
look into
assistant
it and
reported
investigate it.
that the Wuhan experiments had indeed been reviewed and approved by the NIH.
They had, because
Those
they
were not
weren't
the
gain of
actions of
function
officials who
according to the way
believed
that
that a
NIH
research
regulated
related
that
to origin
research
was
at
an
the time.
absurd conspiracy theory. They were the actions of officials urgently trying to determine whether their agency funding was connected to the research under discussion, connected to the pandemic. You could not hide that your agency had funded the Wuhan research or
He didn't
your
try
long
to.
history of defending gain-of-function research. The only alternative left was
There's
to argue
nothing
that
wong with
COVID-19 did not
defending
originate in the
gain-of-function
Wuhan
research,
lab.
okay? Gain-of-function research has
You
many,
were not
many
a
benefits.
detached observer.
Gain-of-function
You had an
research
institutional interest
occurs
in the public
when it
believing that
occurs.
federally
It does
funded
not
research
always
had
result
nothing
in
to do with
something
the
that creates a
pandemic.
pandemic
It
risk.
was a conflict of
It
interest from the
also
very
allows
beginning.
us to develop antiviral
The authors of
drugs,
the proximal
vaccines,
origin of
to understand better
SARS-CoV-2
how these viruses
privately
work and to
had
understand which
serious
of them we
doubts
should actually
about
be
a
devoting
natural
resources
origin.
to find
Within
out which
days,
ones are
though,
an actual
they
threat to
flipped.
humans.
And they all wrote
That
in
was the
proximal
point of
origin
this
that the
research.
virus was almost certainly not a laboratory construct.
It
That
wasn't a
paper was then
laboratory
used by the
construct.
government and the media and you to discredit Americans who were asking the same questions that you and the authors
That is
were asking
nonsense.
yourselves
And
privately.
he's talking about the proximal origin paper,
You
which
even
is a paper
cited
that
proximal
several of my
origin from the
colleagues
White
wrote,
House
in which
podium.
they stated that after
You held it
examining
out as
the
evidence that the virus could not have been
this was
engineered.
very early on,
But you
March
didn't
2020.
disclose your role
They
in the
concluded
discussions
that
that
it was
preceded the
implausible
writing
that
of
it
the
came from a
paper.
lab.
You did not disclose the author's original concerns. You did not reveal that you had been part of the paper, that you had read and offered editorial comments on the paper before it was published, before you began using it as evidence that it couldn't have originated in the lab. You did
Okay,
not
so,
disclose it. You had
what
immediately
we do when
investigated
we write
yourself
papers is
whether
often we will run
NIAID
them by other
funding might be
colleagues
connected
and
to the research.
get their opinions on
You
them.
did not
And
tell
then
the American
sometimes,
people the full story.
in this case, given that it was about
Duly
the origins
released
of the
private
pandemic,
messages
and we're
indicate
talking
that the
about the
doubts
NIAID director,
with
who's
the authors
probably
and
the
others
country's
didn't
most
disappear
prominent
after the
virologist,
publication.
wouldn't you
So
ask
while
that
this was being
person
waived
for their
at the
input
White
on your
House to
paper
show
that
that it
is
couldn't
about
come
the
from the
origins of the
lab, the
pandemic,
authors were
and yet
still
has very little evidence to
privately
go on at the
continuing to
time?
assign a
I would.
meaningful probability to a laboratory origin. One thing in public and another in private. Some of the same scientists discussed avoiding email and carefully managing communications that might eventually be obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. The pattern is straightforward. Privately, there was alarm, then an immediate inquiry to see if NIAID's possible exposure to funding, then a rapid public declaration of certainty, continued private doubt, and then years of resistance to disclosure. The question is why? The only logical answer is that your primary concern was avoiding culpability.
Oh, that's
Your primary
bullshit.
concern was hiding the fact that you had approved the funding for this dangerous research.
He never tried.
Your support of gain-of-function research
And in
is
fact,
extensive
the research is
and
not dangerous
long-standing.
if done under
In
appropriate
2011, your
biosafety
agency
conditions,
funded Ron
which as far as I
Fauci's
can tell it
laboratory
was.
when it mutated the avian flu until it could spread through the air between mammals. This was the tipping point. This is when others became worried. You funded this. You advocated for this. The federal government's own biosecurity board, though, recommended withholding the details of these experiments because of the danger the research posed. People were concerned that publishing it was publishing a roadmap to creating bioweapons
Now,
around
this
the
is
world.
absurd.
But you sided
Nobody would
with
use
the
that as the
gain-of-function
roadmap
scientist
to creating
Fauci
bioweapons,
and
because
argued
these methods
that
have
the
literally
benefits
been
of publishing
published
the research
for the last
far
40 years,
outweighed
almost
the
50
risks.
years.
You defended
In
this
1981,
avian flu
my PhD advisor
transmissibility
published
experiments as critical
cloning of
research.
poliovirus,
You
which
wrote
is the
that
first
even
mammalian
if a
virus that was
scientist
ever cloned.
became infected
Vincent
and triggered a
Racaniello
pandemic,
invented
the
dangerous
benefits of the
gain-of-function
gain-of-function
research in
experiments
1981.
outweighed the risks.
And those methods have been available
In
ever since.
2014, your agency,
You can read
NIAID,
Rasmussen and
began funding the
Racaniello,
Wuhan
2011,
bat
Virology.
coronavirus
It's
work.
a classic paper in
In
which I describe how
2015,
to
Ralph
clone
Barrett
human rhinovirus
and the
1A.
Chinese scientist Shi Zhengli published NIAID-supported research combining a bat coronavirus spike protein with a SARS backbone.
This
The
is called
resulting
a
virus
chimeric
could
virus.
infect human
This is
airway
one way
cells.
to assess
It's a novel
whether or
virus that
not
now can
a
infect human
virus that
cells.
has that
It
spike protein
gained
could potentially
transmissibility.
enter and
It
infect a
gained
human
function.
cell. It's
In
critical to this type of
2018,
work with live
the same group
viruses
of
so that we
scientists,
can understand
EcoHealth,
whether or
Barrett,
not that
Shi,
virus in
and their
real life
collaborators
would
submitted
actually infect
the
a human
diffuse
cell and
proposal.
potentially cause a pandemic.
Diffuse proposal, which involved the insertion of a furin cleavage site into the coronavirus. DARPA rejected it as too dangerous. When COVID was sequenced, though, early on in January of 2020, within days, scientists discovered that, lo and behold, it had a novel furin cleavage site, just as had been proposed in the
It's
diffuse
true
project.
that no other sarbecovirus
This is
has a
either an
furin
extraordinary
cleavage site.
coincidence
However,
or a
another
smoking gun.
sarbecovirus, one of the
Evidence that the
closest related
Chinese had created
sarbecoviruses found in a
COVID-19.
bat and louse
It
in
made
nature,
the laboratory
has
origin
almost
question
a
more
furin
legitimate,
cleavage site.
and it made your
Almost
categorical
many,
public
many
denials
other beta
indefensible.
coronaviruses have
On May
furin cleavage
on May
sites
11,
and other
2021, you
subgenera
told the
of,
Senate
the
NIH
genus beta
has never,
coronavirus.
ever, and does not
MERS,
now
for example,
fund
has 2 and
gain-of-function
possibly
research
3.
in
One of them
Wuhan
might not be
in the
functional.
Wuhan Institute of Virology.
But I leave that to my
When I
colleagues.
gave you the
furin
opportunity
cleavage site
to correct the
experts.
record, to reconsider the statement, you
It's not
responded that you
unusual
had
to have
never
a
before
furin
lied
cleavage
to
site in a
Congress.
viral glycoprotein, however.
We were then
IPAP
told
flu
that
has one,
only the
Ebola
government's
has
narrowest
one,
regulation
many
of definition
viruses
counted
use
here, that you
urine,
could define
to
gain-of-function
cleave
in
their
one way
glycoproteins,
in
which
which
is
this
a critical
wasn't
part of the virus
gain-of-function,
entry
in which
procedure.
all of the common sense of the world would be thrown out, all of the idea that the mice were dying and the virus was more transmissible didn't matter because you had a technical definition that allowed you
When
to
you
fund
have
it. But
higher
the real
titer virus
question
in
is,
culture,
was
it
it
does not
dangerous?
mean
Was
that
it
it
a
is more
wise
transmissible.
decision to fund this?
I'm going to say this over and
And
over
you haven't
again.
deviated from that. You've never admitted that it could have been a mistake funding this research in China.
Why
The
would
American
he admit
people weren't
that?
asking for a semantics
He
debate
hasn't done
over what is
anything
gain
wrong.
of function. They were asking, does common sense say this research was dangerous in Wuhan? They wanted to know whether their money-funded experiments in Wuhan that made bat coronaviruses better able to infect humans. The answer is yes. They wanted to know whether NIAID adequately supervised their work. The answer is no. When you defended this research, you described its benefits in the broadest terms. But when Congress demanded accountability, you hid behind the narrowest possible definition.
Oh, that's bullshit.
You can't have
He
it
hid
both
behind.
ways.
He hid behind the definition
Your
of
conduct
how
concerning
gain
federal
of function
records raises
research is
further
actually
questions.
regulated. It's called the
It is a crime to
P3CO,
destroy federal
the
records.
potential
Yet our investigation
pandemic
reveals
pathogen,
your assistant
care and oversight
diligently
framework.
reported that she
The
deleted
P3CO says
tons
that
of emails.
EPPP,
In
or
2024, you
enhanced
testified that you did
PPP,
not
which is
delete
their
federal
term for gain
records.
of function,
Who's telling the truth?
is work that
You
makes
or your
viruses
assistant?
more transmissible
The committee has
and
obtained
or more
repeated
pathogenic
instructions from
in
you telling federal
humans,
officials to delete
specifically.
communications.
Not in mice, not
On
in cell
February
culture,
2nd,
in
2020,
humans.
one day after Origin's call, you told Francis Collins, please delete this email after you read it. The committee asked for your voluntary cooperation to come today. Your appearance had to be compelled by subpoena. You're here today under duress. You're
Maybe
here
he
today
didn't want to
because of
show
the
up
court
eagerly to
ordering
your
it.
McCarthyist witch hunt,
President
buddy.
Biden issued you a sweeping pardon extending back to 2014, the same pardon he gave to his son Hunter. A pardon may protect a person from criminal prosecution.
The same
doesn't
pardon he
rewrite
gave
history.
to the January 6th committee, I should
It does
add,
not
because
erase
he was very
documents. It does
concerned
not
that you were
convert
going
a
to do the same
misleading
thing
statement
to
into a
them
truthful one.
that you're doing to
And
Tony
it does not
Fauci right
prevent
now,
Congress
which
from
you are going to
establishing
do
what
if you're
happened.
successful.
There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. And there will again be officials who insist that uncertainty must be hidden for the public's own good. They will demand obedience. They will invoke science. I am the science, as though it were a commandment.
Well, you're not.
They will argue that government officials cannot be questioned because questioning them would undermine public trust.
I don't think
They have it
Tony
backwards.
Fauci ever once
It
said
is
that you could not
secrecy that
question
destroys
him.
trust. It is
And I have
arrogance
met Tony
that
Fauci.
destroys trust.
And when I met him,
it is
other than the fact
censorship
that I was so
that destroys
nervous, like,
trust.
because he
And it
was
is the
Tony
refusal to admit error that destroys trust.
And I was
That loss of trust
I was
may be
barely
your
able
most
to get
damaging
out,
legacy.
but I did ask
Trust can't be ordered. It has to be
He was very
earned.
nice about it. I was
No
literally in the
scientist is
elevator.
above scrutiny.
elevator
No
pitch.
government official is
Angie
beyond
Rasmussen's pool.
accountability.
This was in 2019.
And no public servant has the right to treat the suffering of millions of Americans as a footnote to his preferred version of history.
It's
I
not
now
his preferred
recognize,
version of history that we're talking about. He's
Senator
talking
Peters
about
for
the
his
evidence.
opening remarks.
Your preferred version
Thank
of
you, Mr.
history
Chairman.
is this fiction that you're
The
portraying
Senate
right now.
Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has a long and a very proud history.
Well, at least
of
Gary
conducting
Peters showed up.
serious
Hopefully he'll be
oversight
in
on
fighting
behalf
Gary
of
mode
the
today.
American people. When this committee has been at its best, Democrats and Republicans have worked together
And that's
to
true.
investigate complicated issues.
And I'll
to
say Gary Peters
follow the
is about
facts
this.
wherever they may lead, and produce
Rand Paul tried to
recommendations that
exclude
actually
him and all the
strengthen
Democrats
our
from
nation's
this
security
invited,
and improve
transcribed interview that
government
Tony Fauci
functions.
declined to go to, which is why
That
Rand Paul had to
bipartisan
issue
tradition
this.
has produced meaningful work following Hurricane Katrina, the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, failures at the Secret Service, and countless other matters. Unfortunately, today's hearing is the latest step in the chairman's sharp departure from that long tradition.
Indeed.
This hearing appears to
Peters
be a
was
culmination
real
of
mad
months of
about being excluded
biased
from
and
the
selected
transcribed
efforts by
interview.
the majority under
Got a
the
real
guise
pissed off
of
letter.
a
That's how you know
committee
he was mad.
investigation to basically legitimize a predetermined conclusion that was reached years ago.
Indeed.
In 2021, the chairman has called for today's witness to be fired, to be arrested, accused him of leading cover-ups and conspiracies.
Yep.
He has even featured the witness prominently in fundraising emails
Indeed.
and on the cover of his book. He has also called for the cancellation
You
of
can
the
believe
witness's
mentions
security
Tony
detail,
Fauci by
despite
name.
the fact the witness and his family have received numerous credible death threats. When I served as chairman, Senator Paul and I
I'm glad to
launched
see that
a
Gary Peters is
bipartisan
bringing it today.
biosecurity investigation that included oversight of risky research and the origins of COVID-19, because we agreed that the committee's work would be stronger if we did it in a bipartisan manner and just followed the facts.
Right, because the origins
That
of the
was and
pandemic shouldn't be
continues
a
to
political
be
question.
an area of
Shouldn't be a
legitimate
partisan
and
political
certainly
question.
needed
It should be a
oversight.
scientific one.
As chairman, Senator Paul has taken the opposite approach. He has abandoned longstanding practice by blocking minority participation in committee oversight actions and has chosen to selectively release committee records that the minority has never had any access to in order
Yeah, I
to
wonder why
support
he would do
his
that. I thought it was supposed to be all about
pre-drawn
transparency.
The chairman has repeatedly
It's almost like
excluded
he's trying
committee's
to
minority
create a narrative
and withheld documents
facts don't
and evidence
support it.
from members that are entitled to receive them, disregarding longstanding Senate rules and committee precedent that have preserved the credibility of our oversight in this committee for decades. I have raised these concerns directly with the chairman because it's not just what we investigate that matters, but how we conduct that investigation. That also matters. One-sided investigations designed to validate predetermined conclusions do not serve the American people who sent us to actually uncover the truth and to solve problems. I wrote to the chairman requesting that he adhere to committee rules. But instead of addressing concerns that I raised, he removed part of the committee's website from the public view. This move not only prevented the public from being able to view those list of concerns, it adds serious questions about the desire for transparency and legitimate oversight of this matter.
It's almost like this stuff is all made up for a political reason.
Disappointing. It's not simply the chairman's actions, but what we could be using this committee's true and time oversight responsibilities to accomplish. This committee has not held its annual threats hearing at all in this Congress. We have not held a budget hearing for the Department of Homeland Security.
There
are important hearings that we would have the opportunity to discuss as to how to strengthen our Homeland Security across the board. No hearings on those topics. Instead of focusing on the national security challenges that we are facing in our country right now.
I should add that infectious disease is a big one.
Backwards. Revisiting questions this committee has already examined, including through bipartisan work that Senator Paul and I conducted together when I served as chairman of this committee. But rather than building on that work to strengthen our preparedness against future disasters, we are instead relitigating the past. COVID-19 exposed serious deficiencies in our nation's public health infrastructure. We know that.
It sure did.
More than 1 million Americans lost their lives, and this committee should absolutely continue to examine how we can better prepare our nation against future biological threats. Those are the kinds of forward-looking, life-saving questions that will help our nation be better prepared to protect the health and the safety of Americans when the next emergency occurs.
And you know what? That was what Tony Fauci's job was, and that was why he funded
at this precise moment, we should be strengthening our capabilities. The Trump administration seems to be doing everything in their power to actually weaken our capabilities. The administration has hollowed out the public health workforce. They have fired, pushed out, and cut funding for public health personnel, shrinking the CDC workforce by a quarter. Thousands of experienced scientists have left government service, and with them has gone critical institutional knowledge that cannot be easily replaced,
and
certainly
actually
not
basic
quickly
function of these agencies.
The administration, thanks to political operatives like Russell Vought, has slashed or illegally withheld funding for life-saving medicines and cutting-edge technologies that let us rapidly develop them during an emergency. Mr. Vought is now politicizing the federal grant-making process, proposing to subject all federal grants, including those for disaster relief, housing development, and cancer research, to the whims of political appointees, not nonpartisan experts.
They're going to get rid of as many federal grants as possible.
All of this has left the American people
for, like, bridges,
more vulnerable
roads,
to infectious disease threats.
and schools.
And we are already tragically
and elections.
seeing the consequences. Staffing and funding cuts have slowed the federal, state, and local response to ongoing outbreak of a foodborne parasite, which has sickened thousands in my home state of Michigan, as well as across the country. At the same time, the administration cuts to global health programs and international partnerships have greatly reduced our ability to contain dangerous diseases like Ebola before they spread to our shores. We should be examining whether our federal health agencies have the personnel and the resources they need to effectively prevent, detect, and respond to these threats. We should be asking how to strengthen our biodefense efforts to deter our adversaries
Yeah,
and
we sure
prevent
should.
biological attacks against our country.
Instead, we're
And
attacking
how our
our own
government
scientists.
can better coordinate and communicate during
I should add that right
public
now
health
I'm at the American
emergencies.
Society for Virology annual
These are the
meeting,
kinds
and I'm
of
missing Ralph
forward-looking
Barrett's
matters that
keynote
are
address.
worthy
Ralph
are
is one
worthy
of
of
the
this committee's
scientists
time.
that Rand
Instead,
Paul and all of these people
We are here
used
continuing the chairman's
transcript of his
year-long
interview,
focus
in which
on
he
one
very
individual.
clearly states what gain of function
History tells us,
is
unfortunately,
not being mentioned right
another
now,
pandemic
but it was
is
one of the
all but
documents that
inevitable.
Rand Paul put out among the
question is
diaries
whether
and the Slack
Congress
messages of
and
my
this
colleagues
committee
and all the things
will
that
work
he
to
claims
better
are
prepare our
evidence.
country
They're
for it,
evidence of
or
nothing
continue
except
looking
people kind of
backward
like joking around with each
while
other
our
and
public
talking
health
with each other and
infrastructure
having doubts and
crumbles
uncertainty
around us.
and trying to do the best that they
That
could
is the
under
hearing
very challenging situations
that
and
we should
times
be
of
having
uncertainty.
today. Unfortunately, I fear the intent of this hearing is only meant to further a purely partisan agenda and it will not make Americans safer.
It absolutely is meant to further a partisan agenda, and it absolutely will not make Americans safe, and it absolutely will be tremendously harmful to American democracy.
This is the most transparent investigation in the history of Congress. We actually created a website, and we put all of the information on the website. It continues to operate. The reason it hasn't been accessed is no Democrat ever signed up for it.
Oh, give me a
Not one
break.
Democrat. We told them the access. They never asked for the access code. They haven't been on the website because they have not cared about the investigation. It's the
That
practice
is-
of this
that is
committee
the
to
biggest
swear in the
pile of shit
witness.
I've ever
Dr.
heard.
Fauci, please stand and raise your
They
right
didn't
hand.
get the access code? I mean, did you give it to them?
Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Dr. Anthony Fauci, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Give it to him, Tony.
Member Peters, members of the committee, I served at the NIH for over
I'm going to give Tony
54
the stage
years,
here.
38 of those
Nope,
as director of
That's
the
not giving
National
him the stage.
Diseases. Over that period, I proved that I believe in and respect the value of legitimate congressional oversight. In fact, I testified before and/or briefed Senate and House Senate and House committees well over 200 times over those 38 years. During and after the COVID pandemic, I have appeared multiple times for hearings in the Senate and the House, usually under oath, and sat for several days-long transcribed sworn interviews, answering questions about the very issues that are now the subject of this hearing. However, given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Any reasonable person who has followed his unhinged obsession with me would readily come to the same conclusion. Therefore, although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
We will now begin a round of questioning. Dr. Fauci, your testimony today is compelled by
Well, this is
law
gonna be
and
fast.
subpoena. As you know, it's a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 to knowingly make a
But we're
material
not going to
false
sign
statement
off
to
just
Congress,
yet, because I want to
with a
see what
penalty
kind
up
of
to
dumb
5
questions
years
they
of
were going to try to
imprisonment.
get answers to.
Understanding that you are under oath, The American people would like to understand your reasoning, your rationale for why you chose to fund the research in Wuhan. There have been, intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the DOE, have all come to the conclusion that more likely than not, the virus came from the lab in Wuhan. And so we'd
No,
like to know
they
what was the
didn't.
rationale,
They came to
what
that
was the
conclusion
discussion,
with
how,
moderate confidence at
what
best
went
at the
behind the
FBI.
decision to fund the research
And
in Wuhan.
I'm glad Tony's not going to answer this
How did
because
you
he
come
didn't
to
make
the
a decision
conclusion
to
that a
fund this
totalitarian
research,
country
not directly.
would be capable of doing
Tony
this in a
Fauci, as an
VSL-2
individual,
lab,
does
a
not
lab that
approve
lacked the
every single
security?
NIH
What was the
subaward.
reasoning, and are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you,
Are you sorry?
given
What
another
kind
chance, say,
of
well, gosh,
investigation
circumstances now,
starts
as I know
off
it, maybe
with,
it
"Are you
wasn't a
sorry?"
wise thing. Can you explain to
Not
the
an
committee
objective,
why you chose
fact-finding one,
to fund
that's
this
for
dangerous
sure.
research in China?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Good for you, Tony.
In the red folder on your table is a copy of Section 192 of Title II of the U.S. Code.
Oh, it's like
Your
being on
counsel's been
Oprah,
provided
except
a
instead of
copy as
getting a new
well.
car, he gets a
That
copy
section
of
makes
like
it
the
a
laws
crime
that
for
he
a witness
supposedly
appearing under
violated.
subpoena to refuse to answer any questions pertinent to the question under inquiry. Do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, it's
On
called
the
the
advice
Fifth
of
Amendment to the
counsel, I respectfully
Constitution,
decline
buddy.
to answer
He
based
doesn't have
upon my
to
rights
answer.
under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Let the record record that the witness has refused to answer whether there's a folder in front of him based on his Fifth Amendment right.
Oh, come on.
It is true that you're appearing
LOL.
under direction of our subpoena to provide testimony on matters under consideration by the committee, including the origins of COVID-19, risky life sciences research, and your tenure as a federal government employee. Additionally, you've been provided a full and unconditional pardon dated January 19th, 2025, for any offenses against the United States which may have been committed or taken part from January 1st, 2014 through the date of the pardon for a 10-year period.
So,
Arising
Steve, that's
from
the
or in any
point.
manner related to your service as
The
director
dates
of the
of the
National
pardon.
Institute
They're gonna
for
try to get him for
Allergy and Infectious
perjury
Diseases.
right
As a member
now.
of the White House
So it was very
Coronavirus
smart
Task
of his
Force
lawyers to advise
or
him
the
not
White
to
House
answer.
COVID-19 response
Because
team
they're
or as
saying
Chief Medical
that
Advisor to the President.
We've decided that it was a lab leak.
Have you
Anything
refused
you
this
say
pardon,
that's
or do
actually
you
true
have any reason to believe
that says
this
it wasn't
full
a
and
lab leak
unconditional
is now
pardon, this
perjury,
grant of immunity,
and it's
would
after the dates of
somehow
the pardon.
require you to plead the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Based on the facts presented, I'm going to direct you to answer the questions. The committee has issued a valid subpoena. They have requested your presence here. The questions are very pertinent to your decision-making as head of NIAID.
Still not
as
going to
well
answer
as,
them, Rand, no matter
as
how
a
many
chief
times you
advisor
tell
to
him
the
that he's
president.
supposed to.
Do you still refuse to answer the questions?
Yes, because
On
it's
the
his
advice of
constitutional
counsel, I
right.
respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
You know, I'm really glad that Tony Fauci keeps doing this because I have to say, there is no senator, no political
Dr. Fauci,
party, no
were you ever
objective
made aware of
that should
gain-of-function
override
research
the
on
Constitution.
monkeypox
Our
being
constitutional
conducted at the
rights are the
National
most important
Biodefense
things.
Analysis and Countermeasure Center
Oh,
and
boy.
back at Fort Detrick?
Well, this is
On
out of
the
nowhere.
advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Although Tony Fauci, I should
Dr.
add, is not
Fauci,
in
did the
charge of
CIA ever
NBAC.
transfer
NBAC
funds to
is under the
NIH
Department of
under
Homeland
an
Security.
interagency agreement?
On the advice of
I see where
counsel,
they're
I
going with this,
respectfully
too.
decline to answer based upon my rights
This is
under
Tulsi
the Fifth
Gabbard
Amendment
stuff. So
of the
Tulsi Gabbard
Constitution.
alleged that there was this network of biolabs funded by the Department of Defense, and eventually also the Department of Homeland Security was
Dr.
involved.
Fauci, did the NIH ever conduct research
They're
for
trying to
or
say
in
that basically
coordination with
Fauci
any
was sort of the
element of
puppet
the
master
intelligence
controlling
community?
this like
CIA,
international network of
ODNI?
gain-of-function labs. This is going to
On the
be
advice
really
of counsel, I
unsatisfying for Rand
respectfully
Paul.
decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Rand Paul
The
really
reason
should
why
have learned
these
how to
questions are
phrase his
important
questions
is,
in a
President Trump has
more
done a ban,
bombastic
and we're
way
glad
that
that
can
he did a ban
communicate
on
this to people
gain-of-function
better.
research. So we're better
He's
off
really
than we
not
were
explaining to people
when
what
we
he's
had an
trying to get
advocate
here.
serving as head of NIAID, an advocate for gain-of-function research. There is still, though, a question, though, whether or not the intelligence community is adhering to that order. There's a question of whether or not gain-of-function research is still ongoing. And these are important questions the American people deserve to know. Dr. Fauci, have you been read into any
I'd like to
classified
know how
Department
many
of Homeland
Americans
Security
actually know what
program,
gain-of-function
any
research
prospective
is.
special access program
And
concerning
I'd be happy to
gain-of-function
tell
research?
every single last American what it is
On the
and
advice
talk
of
about all the
counsel, I
issues and
respectfully
concerns.
decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
But I don't think actually Americans need to know about every single virology NIH subject.
When we look at the research in China, the gain-of-function
Whether it's
research
to another
that
country or
you've
not.
denied was gain-of-function, one of the things that startled the scientists when they saw COVID in the first couple of weeks was when they looked at the sequence of it, they said, oh my God, there's a furin cleavage site in it. And in this particular family of coronaviruses, the sarbecoviruses, they'd never seen this before. They were also startled to look at it and see
We've
how
seen
it
it
was
before in
coded
the
for, what the
Myrbeco-viruses
codons
and
were.
the
And to
Mbeco-viruses, probably
discover
in the
that the codons used
Hippoco-viruses.
out
Like,
of 36
I can't
different
remember all the
possibilities turned out to be the one
subgenera
that's commonly
of beta
used in gene
coronaviruses.
manipulation by
There's a
scientists.
lot of coronaviruses that have furin
Dr.
cleavage
Fauci,
sites
were
in
the
them, so it's not
scientists at
that weird.
the Wuhan Institute of Virology capable of inserting a furin cleavage site into a coronavirus?
That's actually a good question because I'm
On
not
the
sure that
advice
they
of
did have the
counsel, I
molecular
respectfully
skills to do
decline
that.
to answer based upon my rights
So
under
one
the
thing
Fifth
that's very
Amendment of the
interesting is
Constitution.
that
So
coronaviruses
one
are
of
very hard to
the
clone.
experiments that was
And
pretty
not that many
common
people are very
was
good
they
at
would
it.
take the backbone
Very
of
common.
a SARS virus. And this would be a SARS virus that the backbone itself wasn't that dangerous.
SARS
But then they would
SARS-1 related
dig through
virus
guano,
called
300 feet
one
underground,
or
back guano.
SHC-014.
They'd find other
Those were
viruses,
the only two
unknown viruses. They'd
backbones
take
that
the
they
S
used,
protein off of an
because
unknown
those are
virus
probably the
and
only
stick it
ones
on a
that they managed to
backbone.
clone.
And then they would infect mice that have humanized cells.
Not
And they were trying to
humanized cells,
discover
they are
if
expressing a
create virus
transgene
that
for the
infects
human
humans.
receptor that
And then
allows
people
the
would say, well,
virus
gosh,
to
that doesn't
bind
sound
to
like
the
a really
receptor
good
that we know
idea
it
to
can bind, the human
create
receptor,
viruses
to
that
be
don't
internalized
exist in
into the
nature
cell.
to see if
They are
they'll
not
infect human
humanized. They are not
cells.
suddenly
What
human
if one
because they express
escaped?
human ACE2.
What if you keep infecting this and do serial passage, you actually adapt the virus to be infectious to humans?
No, you don't.
So the
Serial
question
passage
is whether or
invokes
not
a lot of
Dr.
changes
Fauci,
depending on
the
how
Wuhan
you
Institute of
serially
Virology
passage
was
it.
combining
If
an
you
S
serially
protein with one virus
passage SARS
with the
coronavirus
backbone of
to in
others,
viro cells,
and could this
which are the cells
lead
we
to
use to
a
often grow our
virus?
stocks,
Maybe it wasn't even
often loses
predicted,
the
but could it
furin
lead to
cleavage site
viruses
because
that
that's a cell
gained
culture
in
specific
function
adaptation
and then
that
could
does
lead to a
not adapt it
pandemic?
to humans. Another colleague who is here at
On
this
the
meeting
advice
at
of counsel, I
ASB
respectfully decline
has
to
previously
answer
shown that the
based
furin
upon my
cleavage site is
rights under
required
the
for
Fifth Amendment
pathogenicity.
of the Constitution.
One of the arguments that you and others have made against this virus coming from the lab is it couldn't have come from the viruses that have been published. And nobody's really arguing that. I think from the very beginning, people acknowledged that the viruses that have been
No, but
published
you are
too
arguing
far
that because you literally
evolutionarily
said that
distant
they are
from,
doing
a
this
virus
with
that
these
could have become
backbones.
COVID-19.
And in fact, they are too
But
evolutionarily distant.
what has never been acknowledged by the side who tries to call the other side a conspiracy theory, which is
Oh,
really
that's me.
something you don't usually see in a scientific
What do
debate.
we
This is the
usually
first time
say,
I've ever
Rand?
seen an article printed in Lancet by your friends who called this a conspiracy theory.
It is a
And these are the kind
conspiracy
of things
theory.
you see as a screed on a political, website. You
How
don't
often
really
does
see
this
this
dude
in
read the
science.
Lancet? He's such
Well,
a
when
bad
they
ophthalmologist that
released
he had to
this as
start his
being
own
a
board
conspiracy
certification
theory,
for
we're
to
wondering
board certify
that
himself because he
when you
wouldn't
do this,
join
when you
like the
combine these
regular board
viruses
certification thing,
and
or maybe he couldn't
are
get
able
board
to
certified.
grow them in humanized cells, whether or not this kind of risky research, whether you call it gain of function or not, whether you use the definition of gain of function, whether this kind of research should have had
Who
more
needs
scrutiny. I think
definitions?
in your House testimony, you testified that you never traveled to China and that you were unaware that anybody at NIH ever examined the labs, that you trusted the Chinese scientists. I think you've said that even recently, that with your discretion, you trusted the Chinese scientists. The problem is that even in our country, we trust our scientists. They're good American scientists, probably doing the right thing for America. But at the same time, we oversight to make sure it's not dangerous research, but we
Right, there's
also
oversight in
investigate the
China,
lab.
too.
I believe Fort Detrick was one of our main labs was closed down in the last year or two because of, research institute, a research incident that was dangerous with dangerous
Plumbing
pathogens.
problem. It was not
And
a
so
research incident.
The American
that
people
was,
would want to know,
Oh, yeah.
how could you
He's
approve
talking
this
about
dangerous
the
research
holes
in
poked in the
China,
containment
say
suit.
that
Yeah,
you
that's
trusted
true.
the
He
Chinese
was shut down for that.
scientists, and then in the
That
end,
story's not
you had to
exactly
admit that
how
you'd
it's
never
been
been there, and
reported
none of
either.
your inspectors had ever been there. Dr. Fauci, had any of the labs where this dangerous research was occurring, were any American lab oversight or lab investigators, did they ever appear in these labs to make sure that they were safe labs?
I don't even know what
On the
that
advice
means.
of counsel,
The
I
Wilson
respectfully
Institute of
decline to
Virology has
answer
its
based
own
upon my rights under the
institutional
Fifth Amendment
biosafety
to the
committee that handles
Constitution.
all of this. And we know this because
So one of the main
first Muddy
theories for
Waters
those
report,
who
which
have
came
looked
from a
at
different
this
Senate
being
committee,
created in the lab
showed,
was
in
the
fact, some
idea
of their
that could have
biosafety
come from a
reports.
virus not previously published. Dr. Fauci, are you aware that Dr. Shi, who worked for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was said to, and I think in her own words, to have over 100 viruses that had not been previously published that could have been a close enough relative to create COVID-19? Are you aware of that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer
Dr.
based
Cha
upon my rights under
said
the Fifth
that
Amendment to
she
the
went through
Constitution.
all of her freezers.
Under
She
your
investigated all of
testimony
her
previously,
employees,
when you
all of her
denied ever
staffers.
having funded gain of
Nobody had
function in
antibodies to
China,
SARS-2.
it was
find
so
any
adamant
viruses
as
that could have
to
become
be
SARS-2.
striking, to leave no
Now,
room
that does
for any
require that we trust
interpretation
her.
of what is or isn't gain of
However,
function research.
From what I can tell,
But
she
there's
hasn't
another
done
important
anything to
question.
indicate that she's
Did you
untrustworthy
fund
on
gain
this
of
issue.
function research in other biolabs around the world?
On the advice of counsel, I
So this is
respectfully
Tulsi
decline
Gabbard
to
stuff,
answer
too.
based upon
This
my
big
rights
network
under the
of
Fifth Amendment
biolabs
to the
involved
Constitution.
biolabs in Ukraine.
The
where
one research
Rand Paul
project
and
that we
Tulsi
do
made
know
a
you
big
did
deal about
fund
some avian flu
is the one that Ron
they were
Fauci
doing. Now,
did.
Ukraine is
It's
the
important
sixth
to talk
largest
about because this sort of
poultry
was the
exporter in the
beginning of
world,
the debate
so
over
it's
gain
kind
of
of
function.
important that they stay
This
on
wasn't
top of
just me.
avian
I
flu
wasn't
because
even
it
aware
can
of
be
the debate
devastating
10
to the
years
poultry
ago. This
industry.
was other
They're
scientists, over
characterizing
200
this as gain
scientists
of function
at the Cambridge
research.
Working
It's
Group
just
signed a
monitoring
protest
poultry to make
because
sure that
they
they're not
didn't
getting
think you
bird
should
flu.
fund the research, and they didn't think it should even be published because it was sort of a roadmap as to how to make a bioweapon.
Okay, this
So what they
it
did
shouldn't
was
be
the avian
published.
flu, and
This is
important.
ridiculous.
It may be the most
This is
important
a
question
whole
we get
thing
to
that
here today.
started
The
way
avian
back
flu has
in
about
like
50%
2011
mortality for
when
humans.
people did gain
The
of
good
function
news,
research
though,
of
about
H5N1
animal
to
viruses
show that
is
it
they
can
don't
become
infect humans very
transmissible by the
well. It will
airborne route.
infect humans, but doesn't
There
go
was a
human
whole
to human
issue,
very
a whole
well.
big controversy about whether they should
Ron
be allowed to
Fauci,
publish their
with the money
methods.
that you provided to
And
him,
the fact is, these methods,
did an
as I said,
experiment
have
where
been
he
around
caused
for decades.
purposeful mutations
So
to
the
create
ship's
a new
already
virus, an
sailed.
avian
Like we
flu
already
that
know how to do this
didn't
stuff.
just infect birds
Anybody
well, but actually
could do
infected
it,
mammals
provided
well,
you have
went
the viruses
ferret
and
to
you have the
ferret
right
in an
equipment, you have the right
aerosolized
lab and the
manner.
right expertise.
People saw this and were aghast, at the decision-making process that you decided to fund
was
this.
aghast?
This is when,
Nobody was
the debate
aghast.
came about, and you wrote in support of this in the Washington Post, and you said, even if a scientist is bitten, even if a pandemic should occur, the knowledge is worth the risks. Do you still stand by that? Would you like to qualify at all whether or not the knowledge of gain of function is worth the risks, particularly in this case,
That
since
is
we now
absolutely
know
not true. The
15 million
knowledge
people
of gain
died
of function is
worldwide?
describing a
Many people believe this
variety
came
of
from the
very,
lab.
very
Do you think
different
that the risks
experiments.
really
Lots
are worth
and
the
lots of
benefits
different
for gain
experiments
of
can be
function research?
classified as gain of function.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully
Just
decline to
completely
answer
absurd.
based upon my
Rand
rights
Paul is
under the
essentially
Fifth
just making
Amendment to the
things up.
Constitution.
People being aghast at something is not evidence. Unnamed people
We're going
being
to finish with
aghast
this
at
question,
something
and it's
is
based
not
really
evidence.
on that statement, that general statement in your support
Talking
for
about
gain of function.
function
The
research
idea
in
that
general is not
the
evidence.
benefits outweigh the risks.
None of this is
So
evidence
there are many other
of any
people who
wrongdoing
disagree, and they
at
aren't
all.
politicians, they're not, I don't know what party they're in.
It doesn't even
David
suggest
Relman
ethics
is probably one of the
violations.
most
Doesn't suggest
esteemed.
any kind
And
of wrongdoing.
he is a
Suggests that
scientist
Tony
at
Fauci was
Stanford.
doing his
He, I
job.
think, has classified clearance. He's been a consultant to our government probably
Oh, God,
for a
David
decade or
Relman.
more. And he's written about this publicly. He says the opposite. He said that the risks of this research do not outweigh the benefits. He said the risks, we shouldn't do it.
You know what? That's
Richard
David
Ebright,
Relman's
who's been
opinion.
involved in this debate for
Richard
2
Ebright
decades, says the same thing.
is
Says
so
we
abusive,
really
and he is not a
shouldn't be doing
virologist,
this
and
at
neither is
all.
David Relman. None of these
There's a
people have the
quote also
expertise that is
by
needed to actually make a determination about whether this
Kevin
research is
Esvelt
risky or
quote is
dangerous
at
or
the
not.
very end.
David Relman's experience is primarily with studying the microbiome. Richard E. Bright's experience is primarily with looking at the structure of different bacterial
Kevin
polymerases
Esvelt,
developing antibiotics.
who's a CRISPR
Kevin Esvelt
scientist at
is
MIT, also wrote
a dude
about
who,
this gain of function.
I don't know,
implore every
he says that
scientist,
basically
funder,
every viral genome is a recipe
and
for
nation working in the
bioterror.
field, please
None of
stop.
these
No more
people
trying to
have
discover
the
or make
expertise
pandemic-capable viruses.
to make
No
these
more experiments
statements.
likely to disseminate
They
blueprints for
don't
plagues.
have the qualifications to
Dr.
evaluate
Fauci,
the
would
risks
you like
or
to
the
at least
benefits
answer this one
adequately
question for
or
us today
accurately.
and let us know whether or not
Tony
you've
Fauci
changed
does.
your mind on whether or not the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based
Gain of
upon my
function
rights
research, as I
under the Fifth
mentioned, is a
Amendment
lot
to the
of different
Constitution.
things. I do not support gain of function research that has no purpose.
The chairman has
Rand Paul
denied your
speaks about
assertion of
this as if
privilege
we were all
and
just trying to
directed you to
juice up
answer,
viruses for no
but you
reason,
nonetheless
or worse,
refuse
we're
and
trying
stand
to
on
make
privilege
bioweapons.
despite the existence of the
That is
pardon.
not the purpose
The
of
committee will
gain
have
of
to
function
consider
research.
after
The
this hearing
purpose
what
of gain of
appropriate
function
action
research
should be
is
taken
exactly what Tony
against you
Fauci's
for the
earlier
failure to
testimony
testify
said.
after being directed
It is to
do so.
assess
It's against the
threats more
law to
accurately.
obstruct
It is
an
to
investigation of
develop better
Congress.
vaccines.
There will be
It is to develop better
repercussions to your
countermeasures.
refusal
It
to
is to
testify
understand
today.
how these viruses
Senator
work and
Peters.
quantify the threat that they present. Look at all these people clapping for Rand Paul's pathetic performance.
You're not recognized. You're not recognized. If you are unruly, you will be removed from the proceeding. You are not recognized, and you are not recognized, sir. Sir, you are not recognized. You are not recognized.
Who's being unruly? Security. Who's being unruly?
We'll hold off. But you will respect these proceedings. You were told not to sit at the table. You insist on sitting at the table, and we told you you would not be recognized. You are not invited here for testimony, sir. You are being disruptive. Would you behave this way in a courtroom? No, because the judge would put you in jail. I can't do that today, but I can have you escorted from the premises. So I would say, sir, sit quietly and don't say another word. I said, sit quietly. You are not recognized. Another word and you're gone.
Tony's lawyer. Nice try, dude.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear what the attorney has to say.
He is not recognized by the committee or the chair. If he speaks again, he will be removed from the room. This testimony is from Anthony Fauci. This is not a game with his lawyers. He can advise, his lawyers can give him advice. He's got a half dozen here. They're all allowed to talk to him.
Yes.
Well,
All right?
unfortunately, he
But
has to
the
have a half
attorneys are
dozen of
not
them because of the witch
recognized.
hunt you're
In fact, the
perpetrating
attorney was
against
told
him.
not to sit at the table, and he's not obeying that recommendation. There's a
I
row
love this.
behind you, sir.
He's not allowed
That's where you were
to be at
told
the
to sit,
table,
and you're
but
not.
he's there
And now
anyways.
you're
You
disrupting
should
the
be behind
proceedings.
the rope.
And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered. For a lawyer
As an-
not listening to the
with
rules.
an unruly lawyer
That's the way you want to be
who
remembered,
objects
and that's
to
what
him
you're going to
being
do. You are
prosecuted
not
for not committing a
recognized,
crime.
sir.
That's how he'd like to be remembered. That's his
Security, please
legacy.
remove him from the room.
What a piece of shit. Yeah, stripping him of his right to counsel, so, degrading another one of his constitutional rights. This is just absurd.
Let the record state that Dr. Fauci will still have the advice of the other half a dozen attorneys that he brought along today.
Oh,
Senator
hilarious.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the first or the last public health crisis to impact our nation. In December 2022, I released a report that identified significant failures in our federal government's preparedness and initial response to COVID-19. This report contained 17 key findings. It's a very large report, which I have right here. It contains 17 key findings and corresponding recommendations, including the need to invest in sustainable domestic manufacturing capabilities for critical medical supplies, build the infrastructure needed to surge testing capacity for infectious diseases, and robustly fund public health emergency preparedness and responses across all levels of government. Unfortunately, multiple administrations, including the current Trump administration, have failed to fund or to reform our health preparedness. This is something that I would hope the committee in the future would investigate. It needs to be taken a look at.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's
It
one
also
way of
feels
putting
like
it.
a
We're
new
completely
public health
gutting
threat
all of those
is
things that
hitting
you
us
just
every
mentioned,
month.
Gary.
There's a foodborne parasite affecting thousands of people in Michigan and across the country, and our federal agencies still haven't fully pinned down the source of that outbreak.
No, not at all, actually.
Measles cases in this country are at the highest they've been in 35 years. More children are getting sick and even hospitalized from this preventable
And two
disease.
died.
Over 1,000 people have died from the Ebola virus in Africa, and we don't know how widespread this crisis actually is.
It's pretty
We
widespread,
have a
and it's getting
hantavirus
worse.
scare on a cruise ship, and though it hasn't made headlines in the way that the screwworm threatening our food security has, I remain concerned about bird flu that is also spreading and could one day cause a pandemic.
Yes,
This
I
is
am
also something
very
this
worried
committee
about
should
that.
be
Right along
investigating
with you,
and holding
Gary.
hearings on. Since January
love
2025, the
that.
Trump administration has taken a number of actions to drastically weaken our ability to fight infectious diseases and biological threats that endanger Americans.
Indeed.
These actions are both incomprehensible and are also inexcusable.
But they're not
They include slashing
incomprehensible
funding for
once you
public health and
realize that that's
infectious
the point.
disease research, canceling contracts for cutting-edge vaccine technology, shutting agencies responsible for tackling infectious diseases around the world, firing thousands of federal employees with keeping our communities and our medicines and our food supply safe, and injecting political appointees in what should be non-political grant-making functions.
Indeed.
That is something this committee should be looking at. I could go on. I could go on all the topics that we need to be looking at moving forward to protect this country. We're not doing that in this committee. That's what this committee was designed to do.
What we
It's
need
what
to
it
do
has
to
done throughout
protect this
history.
country is
It
to
has done
stop
it in a
having
bipartisan
hearings
way.
like this one.
We should get back to that and think about the future of this country and keeping this country safe.
Yeah, we should.
When a crisis like COVID-19 strikes, we have an obligation to examine what went right and what went wrong to provide accountability for the American people. Congress certainly has done that. Between the House and Senate, nearly 20 different committees, including this committee, as I mentioned, have conducted oversight of the COVID-19 pandemic, conducting transcribed interviews, holding dozens of hearings, and released more than 10 reports. Today's exercise, unfortunately, is a stark departure from those largely bipartisan, legitimate efforts. The chairman has shut the
Legitimate
minority
being
out
the
of
key
participating
term.
equally in these efforts, withheld information, selectively released documents, actions that completely undermine the credibility of this investigation. I will enter a record without objection, Mr. Chairman, a letter that I sent to you that detailed all of those areas that we have concern with and where we were shut out.
Without objection.
We'll provide other details as well. I think today's hearing unfortunately does real damage. It's tempting to turn one person into the scapegoat for a crisis that hundreds of officials across both the Trump and the Biden administration were responsible for handling. And it does so in a way that people that are facing death threats. This is only going to unfortunately deter other scientific experts from public service.
It sure
Understand
will.
that this is what they would have to go through
There aren't
as they
going to be any
provide
public
their
service
advice to
jobs
us.
because we're going to be
We're
a
not going to
fascist
make our
state.
nation safer, and I hope that we can restore by doing these kinds of activities. And I hope that we can restore our legitimate bipartisan oversight that's going to help strengthen our public health and pandemic preparedness and other homeland priorities. That's what this committee needs to focus on. It hasn't the last year and a half. Let's hope it does in the
But
future.
what happened in the last
Thank
year
you,
and a
Mr.
half? That's right. The Republicans got
Senator
the majority
Johnson.
and Rand Paul became the chair.
Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I hope the American people listen very carefully to Chairman Paul's opening statement.
Here we go. Ron Johnson,
I think it's
senator
a
from
stunning
Texas,
indictment
or sorry, Wisconsin,
of the
massive
actions you've taken that
anti-vaxxer.
have been so destructive to global health. I certainly understand why you needed a pardon. I
Right,
certainly
because we were
understand
planning to go
why,
after
on the
you
advice
like
of
this.
counsel, you're not answering any questions because I think it'd be almost impossible for you to answer the questions truthfully.
Oh, no. Well, he actually explained why he's not going to answer
Without
any
really
questions
demonstrating-
because you're trying to railroad him.
What you did,
What did he do
your
besides his job?
culpability. self-incriminating.
It's pathetic. Ron Johnson held a committee meeting, an oversight
a lot. I've been deluged
a couple months ago
with questions,
basically saying that COVID vaccines cause turbo cancer
Fauci.
and myocarditis, and he had a whole lineup of
legitimate
anti-vaxxers.
questions that deserve answers, and now you're
Nothing
not
this
willing
man
to provide
says
those
is
answers.
legitimate.
So with my limited time, I'm going to
Bloviate,
talk about things that my investigation have revealed
his
that
investigation,
have not been adequately answered and quite honestly haven't been adequately covered.
mRNA vaccines
legacy
cause turbo
media.
cancer. Spike is toxic.
I'll kind of combine
Spike
the
sheds.
questions into kind of one, but I certainly, let's put up the last COVID chart.
If I
I
were
was
Fauci,
warned
I'd just
pretty
be
early
like
on
this
about the dangers of the
hearing.
experimental gene therapy that you've called a vaccine, but it really
Experimental
falls under
gene
the definition
therapy.
of gene therapy.
No,
So,
it doesn't. It does not integrate into
I was
the
going to ask you,
genome.
were you
It's not
carefully
gene
monitoring
therapy. It doesn't
the
change your
safety
genes.
surveillance systems like VAERS and VSafe that literally were
Is Tony
deluged
Fauci going over VAERS?
with complaints?
That's
currently,
actually the
worldwide,
CDC's job, and he
there've been
worked for the
almost
NIH.
1.7 million adverse events reported to the VAERS system.
Here we
Of
go.
those, over 39,000 were deaths. And of those deaths, 24% occur on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days.
Some crack
24%,
analysis
which,
from
by
the
the way, just happens to be
scientists
the
over
same
at Children's
percentage that a
Health
Rasmussen
Defense.
poll pointed out the American public believe
least
they,
he pronounces
24%
my
of the
last
American
name the
public
right way,
believe they
though.
know somebody who died of the experimental gene therapy.
So
again, I was
this is actually why I call my
interested in
Substack
asking you whether or
Rasmussen
not
Reports,
you
because
were
Rasmussen
following this as
Reports is
carefully
the
as I was.
shitty
It's not my
Republican
responsibility to
polling
follow
firm that does stuff like
safety
that.
surveillance
Like,
systems,
they do
but I did.
polls that are like, do you
By the
know
way,
somebody who
when I
died from the
published-
experimental
this is
gene therapy
actual
vaccine? And then they're
government
like,
information. When I published
check it out.
and
We just got like 80%
people had me on their
of
shows,
respondents
they would be
saying that they
censored
know
by
somebody
Facebook.
who
They'd
died
be
from the experimental gene
deplatformed.
therapy vaccine.
I think
People are getting
largely
kicked
because
off
of
of
the
Facebook, and
actions
somehow
you
that's
took to
Tony
make sure
Fauci's
that
fault, too.
disinformation wasn't spread. This wasn't disinformation. This was the truth.
It is disinformation. You're
So I was going to ask you whether you
manipulating
knew
data
Dr.
from
Marks.
databases
I think you do
that
know
don't make
him.
any
He's the
sense,
head
that
of
don't say
CBER. He's the
anything
man
about
who's in
vaccine
charge
injuries
of
or vaccine safety.
approving vaccines and surveilling for the safety. My investigation shows that on March 1st of 2021, less than 3 months after the emergency use authorizations, he was warned by Dr. Anna Scharsman, data mining expert, that the algorithm they were using to analyze VAERS data was going to hide in mass safety signals. 26 days later and 3 months consecutively after that, they did data runs with a new algorithm that unmasked those safety signals. They showed dozens of safety signals,
Yeah, and you know what happens when that
including
occurs?
sudden cardiac
do
death, cerebral
investigation
artery
into
occlusion,
those
basal
safety
ganglia
signals,
stroke,
because theirs
vagal
is
rhythm, Bell's
self-reported.
palsy,
That means that you could report anything.
and
People have
pulmonary
reported
infarction.
like that they grew a giant purple penis on their forehead, and like that's in
Your
VAERS.
diaries
that it
now
was a vaccine
show that you
injury.
actually suffered
Obviously, that's not. You can't
pulmonary
verify
infarction
anything
in,
that's
I think,
in VAERS.
probably
So
June
when a safety
2021. I was just
signal
wondering,
comes in VAERS, they convene
I
a
was just
work
wondering
at CDC.
whether it
Usually,
ever went through your mind
part of the advisory committee on immunization
that
practices.
maybe
they
that
convene an
injection,
ACIP
all those
work group,
boosters you took
and they
might have caused
really
that.
dive,
And the
CDC
question I was going to,
dive
and I'll ask this question,
into
were you ever made aware of the
so that
fact
they
that Peter
determine
Marks
if this vaccine safety signal
was
is
warned
actually real and it's
the
not just
algorithm was going to hide the safety signals? And were you told that senior FDA officials were given shown dozens of safety signals
this is so unbelievably
associated
dumb.
with the COVID injection?
Raise your hand. How many people have known
On the
somebody who
advice of
died from the
counsel, I
COVID
respectfully
injection? I
decline
do
to
not.
answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Next area I want to go through is in that same month of March 2021, an employee at NIH, Dr. Nath, led a team of researchers who were diagnosing and treating individuals who'd never had COVID but were severely injured by the genetic therapy injections. Dr. Nath told those
Genetic
individuals,
therapy injections.
stay quiet. We want to make sure that we gather all the information and then release it to doctors so they can treat people like yourself.
Well, that's
There was a
not a
concerted
bad
effort.
approach.
I'll enter this into the record.
It's
It
not keep
appears
quiet. It's
inside
like, just
NIH to quash
don't tell people shit
Dr.
that you're not
Nass
sure about.
publishing that study. It finally was put on a preprint server with telling no one, and I think about May of 2022. I think what's noteworthy about this is Dr. Nath told the injured participants that early treatment, early intervention was crucial.
Early treatment. That means
For them to be treated.
hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin.
And yet within the NIH, they were questioning what was Dr. Nath doing. They didn't want to publish that because, and I want to take time searching for it, because publishing it would create vaccine hesitancy.
No,
Which
I
is what
don't
we
think
continue
that
to hear
NIH
time
ever
and time
did that.
again, is the
I
reason
think
they didn't promote it. They
NIH
lied about the
is
safety
not
signals they
saying
were
that we're
seeing.
going to lie about safety signals to
Throughout
keep
the
vaccine
pandemic, I
hesitancy
always
down.
pushed early treatment.
NIH says we're going to look into this more carefully.
Yeah, we've got things in
actually
here
get
where you
evidence
were
and the data.
really concerned about
I understand
remdesivir because it was
preprint
untested, but
question
hydroxychloroquine, yeah, it was an improved
actually
drug.
been
Maybe some
accepted
safety
by a
issues, but we had a great deal of
journal.
experience with it.
Suggests that perhaps
All of a sudden, you had the
evidence
Surgisphere
supporting
study.
it isn't that
It was
strong.
retracted within 2 weeks because it was completely false. Totally blew up the use of hydroxychloroquine. And
Yeah, 'cause
then
it doesn't
when it comes
work.
to ivermectin,
Which also
by the
doesn't
way,
work.
because I was contacted by so many people, I referred them to doctors who actually had the courage and compassion to treat
Oh, you
vaccine-injured
mean the
individuals.
grifters, like who are
It
selling
works.
people ivermectin that doesn't work at a huge markup.
But I
should
was going to
add.
ask you whether you were
Ivermectin's a
involved in
generic
the
drug.
FDA attack on ivermectin. You
The
had
FDA
a
attack on ivermectin.
interview on CNN
The
on August
FDA did not
29th.
attack ivermectin. The
of,
FDA declined
2021,
to authorize or approve
where
ivermectin.
again, I
because
just
it
don't want to
doesn't
take time to find the exact quote, but you said there's no evidence.
It doesn't work for
There's
COVID.
no evidence
Works great
that
for helminthic
ivermectin is
infections and
helpful.
some
On that
ectoparasites.
exact same day, and I've got the studies right here. There was a website that was tracking the random controlled studies. Here they are,
What a waste of
showing
paper.
60, 70% efficacy of
Printed
ivermectin.
that stuff out.
The same day you say there's no evidence, there was all kinds of evidence.
No evidence. Actually, everything that he's holding, I don't know what it is, but
Loved
it's
ones
not-
had to go
it's
to
not evidence.
hospitals, had to sue hospitals. Just, would you try it? So I want
Fauci
to
looks like he
know,
wants
to
to
what
put that
extent were
pen
you
through his
involved
eye.
in sabotaging hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and did you do that
Sabotaging.
because you knew
how is
the only way you get
first
an
of all,
emergency use
Tony Fauci didn't
authorization
work
for
for the
these drugs,
FDA either.
these experimental gene therapy, was if there was no effective treatment,
Different agencies
you couldn't get the
doing
emergency
this regulatory work.
use authorization. So is
And of
that
course,
why
Ron
you
Johnson knows
helped
that.
sabotage these cheap
But
generic
if you
drugs
were
in
operating
favor of
in good
remdesivir,
faith,
which, by the
you
way,
wouldn't be using
nurses,
terms
are
like
you aware of the fact that
sabotage?
nurses called it "run, death is near"?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
But let me end on this note because
They also
this
hate
just came to light.
remdesivir.
You know, we've got 11
doesn't work very
million pages
well,
of documents.
but-
We also have other people who were in the room. But now you actually lied to your own diary.
You lied to your own diary.
On March 27, 2020, you wrote in your diary, "To my surprise yesterday, the POTUS sent a letter to governors outlining a plan to reopen county by county while monitoring the spread of virus in the low-risk counties. This was half-baked and never shown to Deb or I before it was sent out." So we have evidence that, in fact, you were fully aware of it and certainly approved, if not authored it. So I was just simply asking, I mean, is that true?
What is
I
he
mean,
talking about? He said it was
did you
half-baked.
literally lie to your own diary? Did you know of that letter?
Did you
sent
lie
out
to your own
governors about
diary?
reopening county by county? And again, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you to ask.
Tony
the-
looks like
the-
he's about
the
to
witness
start laughing.
Just answer that one
And
simple
I
question.
would too, honestly. Did you lie to your own
On the
diary?
advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Under the advice of counsel, I think you
Thank you,
should
Mr.
laugh
Chairman.
in his face, Tony.
Senator Hassan.
It's stupid.
Thank you. Dr. Fauci, I want to start by thanking you for
I'm
more
glad
than
more
50
Democrats showed
years
up
of
today.
service to this country at the National Institutes
Maggie
of Health.
Hassan doesn't like.
And it is
she doesn't miss a
unfortunate
beat.
that you have been put in the position that you are in today. And it must be enormously frustrating to know that this hearing is designed to entrap you.
Indeed.
It must be very
glad the Democrats
frustrating
are
for
calling
your
this out.
attorneys to hear the chair's mischaracterization of the legal issues and posture that impact your decisions at the witness table today.
Indeed. Very much
Meanwhile,
so.
I was going to ask you a series of questions about things that are relevant right now to the people of the United States about the state of public health in this country.
I'm glad the
Since
Democrats are also
President
using
Trump
this
took
as an
office
opportunity
in
to
2025,
describe some of these things. And I'm going to be
more
quiet,
than
let Maggie talk.
4,500 cases of measles have been reported. That is more cases in the year and a half since Donald Trump has been president than were reported from 2000 to 2024 combined. Children are dying because there has been increased vaccine hesitancy, fueled by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and frankly, his entire administration. Thousands of people in the United States of America have been sickened by a foodborne parasite, and the outbreak is nowhere near under control, as staffing at the FDA and other critical public health entities has been slashed by Russell Vought and Elon Musk. Last year, the National Institutes of Health awarded 201 fewer grants compared to the previous years. 207, I am corrected, compared to previous years. As those grants were either canceled or delays, especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, I can tell my colleagues what the impact was on people in New Hampshire, on scientists in New Hampshire, on clinical trials in New Hampshire, where people's cancer treatment was interrupted because Elon Musk and Russell Vought know better, they say, than the people at NIH about what to fund. And because they did some sort of word search, it seems, for some of the grants, and boy, oh boy, if you were studying rural health in New Hampshire and trying to understand how to better engage people who need health care in rural America, that was off the table.
Yes, too woke and
America
DEI.
is losing researchers and scientists to other countries because researchers and scientists, highly trained, highly qualified, invested in often by the American taxpayer, are finding the hostility from this administration so strong that it interferes with their science, and they want to pursue science wherever that science takes them. I also sit on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We have had a number of hearings with nominees recently to fill critical spots.
Oh, here we go.
One of those nominees is Dr. Erica Schwartz, a brilliant woman, medical degree, biomedical engineering degree. I think she also told us she has a law degree and a master's in public health. She was a 2-star admiral in the United States Navy, an experienced doctor. And yet, when I asked her if she would push back at Secretary Kennedy, if he instructed her to suspend the promotion of the flu vaccine as he did some point in the last few months, there's an email to prove it, she couldn't answer that question. She either could not, would not, or had been bullied into evading a question about whether she, as the director of CDC, would stand up to Secretary Kennedy, the most unqualified Secretary of Health and Human Services this country has ever seen.
Indeed.
And more than unqualified, somebody who pursues conspiracy theories, degrades people with disabilities, and continues to promote disproved science.
And kill people.
That's the state of healthcare and public health in this country right now, not to mention the $1 trillion or so of cuts to the Medicaid program that is decimating healthcare in my state and decimating it around the country, not to mention the refusal of my colleagues and this administration to extend critical tax cuts for people who are trying to afford insurance on the Affordable Care Act.
That's right.
I just was at one of my community health clinics, and they are reporting fewer and fewer people coming in for care, disrupting care because they can no longer afford health insurance. And that is impacting, of course, the revenue stream to the community health clinic, their ability to hire and pay people, their ability to take
Great,
care
Maggie.
of their community.
I'm glad the
That's what
Democrats
I
are at
wish
least
we were
using this
having
propaganda
hearings
session
about
for good.
in this committee and in the Health Committee.
That is right.
That's what I wish we were trying to address in a bipartisan way.
That's what you were elected to do, and I wish
But
you were too.
instead, we are here in
Making a
an attempt
mockery
to
out of
entrap you
our American democratic procedures.
because you had a distinguished career
Indeed,
trying
a
to
very
put Americans'
distinguished career.
public health first.
I want to be very clear about
With that,
this.
I yield.
The research that Tony Fauci funded
Senator
has saved
Langford.
millions of lives in America and around the
Thank
world.
you. Dr. Fauci, thanks for coming today. I know you're invoking your Fifth Amendment right, which you have the right to be able to do constitutionally, but thanks for coming and be a part of this. There are a lot of issues and a lot of questions that have come up, and hopefully in some day in the future, we'll be able to get all this clarity to be able to pull together.
Okay,
There were
good
over a
cop
million
now.
Americans that died from COVID. You know that well. You were tracking the numbers literally every single day, those affected and those that died from the earliest days. There are a lot of lessons that we've got to learn from this, that we should put into history to be able to determine what happens in the future. How do we respond in the future? How do we deal with something like this again? It was uncharted territory for everyone. But I would tell you, countless families, including my own, watched a loved one die behind glass or through a screen because we couldn't get access to them. Children couldn't get to school. People missed their prom.
Once again,
graduation
it's Tony
ceremonies.
Fauci's fault.
There were
And
lots of
also-
things that happened that dramatically changed the future of
Some
the
of
country.
these things didn't
The mental health
actually-
issues that we have continued to
weren't
deal with from the
forced.
isolation
People
have been
did this
profound. Even
voluntarily.
something as simple as children that wore masks or were around adults wearing masks for all that time
Nobody
are
was
slower
going to
learning
arrest you
language
for wearing a
now
mask.
because they couldn't watch someone's lips moving, and so they're slower in that.
Oh, come on.
Amazingly enough, churches and places of worship were forced to be closed down. There were even churches that met with
I
a
mean,
pastor preached in the parking lot,
rather
and
go
the
to
congregants
church
all
and
met in their
End up dead of
cars
COVID.
with windows up, and police came and scattered them and said, "You can't be here." The simple act of social distancing became an issue, as everyone guessed, what's the right distance to be away from someone else?
It was 6 feet,
Literacy
but
rates have declined.
whether that was
All
right
these
or
things
not,
are
who
results,
knows?
not to mention the loss of
Guess
lives
what?
and the
None of
health
us knew
experiences that
how
have
to
been
deal
out
with
there
this
for many
virus. It was a
Americans. So
brand
there are
new
legitimate
virus.
questions. I wanted to be able to raise some
I
of those
have
to be
more
able to walk
expertise
through some of
than
this
James Lankford
because
in
it has been
coronaviruses.
very, very challenging.
And I didn't know anything.
As we've gone through some of your
Tony Fauci
notes
didn't know
and your
anything.
diary and other things that are out there,
I
we're
have,
trying
like,
to be able to pull
videos
bits
from
and pieces of things to be able to
early
learn lessons.
2020 of me teaching
On
people
May
how
the
to wash
6th,
hands on Good
2020,
Morning America. It wasn't the right thing
You
to
wrote
do.
at that time,
None of us did a
I had a
perfect job.
conversation with
None of
Robert
us would
Redfield,
write all
as you
the
know
time.
well,
We
was
didn't
then the
know.
director of CDC, about the fact that greater than 1 million children worldwide have missed their measles vaccination because of the shutdown. You
That's
stated,
partly
this
true.
is terrible
It's not
and needs to
because
be
of the
addressed,
shutdown,
since
it's
on
because
that
of the
basis alone,
pandemic
there would be
and the
far
disruptions to the global supply
more
chain
excess
and the
deaths
closing of
from
clinics and the
measles among children
overwhelmingness
than
of hospitals
coronavirus
and
deaths
healthcare
among
centers.
children. I need to
Measles
bring this up to the
vaccination
TF, the task force.
became less of a priority
Did
for
you
many
ever have an opportunity to
trying
bring up
stay
the
alive from
potential
COVID, which we didn't
of
have a
measles
vaccine
deaths
for at
among
that time.
children and an infection rate going around the world from measles based on the fact that so many children would not get their measles
And
vaccine
he's trying
because
to
of the
blame
shutdown?
Fauci for the increase in measles now.
I'm sorry,
That
Senator,
is
but on the advice of
absolutely
counsel, I
incorrect.
respectfully
The
decline
reason
to
that we have
answer
so many
based
measles
upon my
cases
rights
now is
under
because
the
of
Fifth Amendment to the
years-long
Constitution.
disinformation campaigns by
That is your right
Secretary
to do.
Kennedy and all of his little
One of the big
anti-vax
issues
friends.
is really coming up is on the lab issue. This was
The lab
clearly
issue.
discussed about whether this came from a lab or whether this came from nature. There are obvious issues and differences
And some
between
of
the
us actually
two
did
to
some
be able to
science
know
about
this.
it, wrote papers
You
on it.
had a lot of conversation on this.
Peer-reviewed
Scientists
papers
around the world
in
were
some
in,
of the best
were in
journals, Science and
conversation on
Cell.
this. There were different statements that you even made in your private notes and your public notes on it. in January the 26th of 2020, this is before we had our first tragic death of coronavirus in the United States, you wrote, it now appears using epi data that the genomic data, the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market, which was the big rumor that was out there. It was this wet market in China.
Yes,
we know the
Juan
market
seafood
was
market.
not the source, it was the amplifier.
Right.
On January the 31st, you wrote about a phone call. You wrote the people on the phone felt the mutations around the furin cleavage site of the spike protein could not have occurred naturally since it would require an evolutionary jump that they found nowhere in bat isolates. They bring up the possibility this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely. February the 1st.
I mean, so this was
Same year,
6 years
2020.
ago.
This
we
is again
barely
still
knew
before our
anything
first
about
death.
this virus.
There was not total agreement
This is
about the
called
likelihood of deliberate
hypothesis
insertion.
development.
Ron said he was sure that this could occur
Talking about Ron
naturally, and we
Fauci,
should not
who is
waste our time and
he's
divert
one
our
of the
effort
gain of
to
function
pursue
bird flu
this.
guys
This
from
is expected
Erasmus
of him
Medical
since
Center
he
in the
was the
Netherlands.
original gain of
Excellent
function person
virologist.
with Yoshi. Also, Christian was
Yoshi
withdrawn.
Kaloka is the other one.
The rest
Christian
felt
Anderson
deliberate
is my
insertion was
colleague,
possible, and given
co-author,
the fact that
evolutionary
Dr. Jing
virologist,
Shi at the
one of the
University of
first who
Wuhan has
noticed
been
the
working
furin
for
cleavage
years
site
in
and
gain of
the
function
sequence
in
and thought it was a little
coronaviruses
weird.
to allow
And so that
adaptation
was
of the
what
spike
precipitated
protein
this
to bind
teleconference.
to the human ACE2 receptor. We could not let this go. That's a remarkable statement for February the 1st of 2020.
It's his impressions
When there
from
hadn't been
having
the
a
first death here,
scientific
but we knew
discussion with
something was moving. You knew well that something was
11
moving.
or
You
so
identified
of the
February the
world's
1st
most
before any of
expert
us had ever heard of the
coronavirologists.
Wuhan lab. Not only the Wuhan lab in the conversation, but literally the scientist that you named in your own notes, the lead scientist that was there. It's interesting to me on that. And the questions I was going to ask you was just your background and knowledge about the Wuhan lab and Dr. Shi and all the details. I'm aware of where you have been on trying to be able to plead your Fifth Amendment right, which is your right to be able to do. But I also want to be able to find out some facts to be able to help us for the future on this. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in May of 2020
They think it came
put
from the
out a
Wuhan CDC
classified
branch
document
office that's
that
next
has
to the
only
market.
been recently unclassified on this, that had this statement: we assess all the necessary conditions for an accidental release of a laboratory-modified coronavirus, specifically a coronavirus adapted to recognize human cell receptors, were present at the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology in mid to late 2019. Now, the question that I had for you is, this is May the 27th of 2020.
All the conditions were
This is
there,
the
but you know
report
what
that
wasn't
most
there?
people will see
The
is
viruses.
this.
They've never been able to
I have
show
clearance. I serve on the intelligence
any
committee.
kind
I've actually read this complete document
of
unredacted.
progenitor
My
virus.
concern is, were
In order
you
to have a
given the
lab
ability
leak,
to see
you have
this
to have the
document
virus to
unredacted?
leak
Based
out.
on your position,
They never
were you
have.
able
There's no
to see
evidence
this
whatsoever.
and to be able to
Nobody's
get this
ever
information? I
produced it.
I could see it.
At any
And I
lab
know what's here. Everybody else
Wuhan
just has
or anywhere
their conclusion
in
at
the
the beginning
US.
of it, not
Anywhere in
this.
China.
My question to you was
No
going to
lab
be,
had a virus
did you have
that
access?
could have
Because it's
become
important for the
SARS
future
coronavirus 2.
that people in your
And that's what
position
you have to have for
do
it to
have
be a lab
access
leak.
to this kind of
If
information
such a virus
and
were
insight.
found in a lab,
Is there any way
I
you
would
could answer
immediately
that question?
become a
Were
lab
you able to
leaker.
give access to this data?
That's how strong that evidence would be.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully
evidence
decline
never
to
been
answer
found,
based upon my rights
probably
under the Fifth
because it
Amendment to
doesn't
the
exist.
Constitution.
You wrote on January the 26th of 2020, we should be allowed to send our CDC epidemiologists to China to work with them so they could see the data firsthand. You also wrote in February 12th, 2020, that you had great concerns about the World Health Organization because it depends greatly on China and, as you stated, often bows to them. Now, this is a really important issue that we've got to resolve for the future. It's not just our cooperation with Chinese scientists, it's our acknowledgement that China covered up their data, wouldn't allow our scientists to be able to come in. They cleaned up the wet market, they cleaned up the other areas. They wouldn't allow you to get access to all the other scientists who are there, including their health records, what happened to them, or even all the sequencing that they had done in advance. For the future of our research and our cooperation with any scientists around the world, I think it's really important that we resolve, if we're going to fund research and cooperate with you, we've got to have certain things from you. If things go sideways, we've got to have access to all information in all places. You were noting not only that China was affecting the World Health Organization and that China was bending them to their will, and so the World Health Organization was putting out data that you saw, at least at that point, as being from a Chinese perspective, covering up what was going on, but you also noted we weren't able to get access to all this information. We've got to be able to figure this out for the future to be able to make sure that research that is done, we have access to all information if something goes sideways at some point, which clearly it did at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Yeah, how are you going to have access
as
to
was
all
noted by many people,
information?
the only
We
lab
already
in the
have all
world
of the
that was doing
information
research
from
like this
NIH.
that had
How are you
a
going to get all the
lower
information from
standard
China?
of
It's a
actually their
sovereign
security
country,
standards there
and
than
it's
many
China.
other labs around the world, yet
You're
they
not
were
going to be
doing
able to
this
just be
very
like, oh,
dangerous
hey,
research.
hand over all your records.
What can we
We need it
gain?
for NIH and for
And
our
what
show
advice
trials
could you
in the
give
US.
us to say in a future setting, we've got to make sure that we actually get information from people and we can be guaranteed that we're going to get that insight? Yes, sir.
I plead the fifth.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I yield back.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the dark days of the coronavirus pandemic, one of the darkest days or times in our history. Hospitals were overflowing. Navy medical ships were docked in the Hudson River. Emergency
I
rooms
never
were
thought I'd
forced
say this, but these
into
are the darkest days in our
unprecedented
country,
triaging
more so than the
during
pandemic.
the worst week of the pandemic, which happens to have been the last week of President Trump's first term. More than 25,000 Americans died of COVID-19. Easy to forget those dark days. But for the past 18 months, the Trump administration has been engaged in a campaign to rewrite this history.
Indeed.
And
They
today's
sure have.
proceeding, I fear, is part of that effort.
I know for a
One
fact
of
that
the
today's
darkest
proceeding is
days
part of that
in
effort.
our Senate's history.
It sure
The Trump
is.
administration has launched a baseless set of smears against vaccines that help pull us out of that public health crisis.
That's right.
Vaccines that are undoubtedly President Trump's greatest accomplishment.
It's
it has
true.
slashed funding to local public health departments that were on the front lines of the pandemic. And those healthcare workers are heroes. It has disparaged those heroes as woke or wasteful. And it has used a politicized Department of Justice to target the researchers who helped us track and understand the novel virus. Today's hearing is another page
My
in
friends.
that playbook.
And my
Sadly,
colleagues.
tragically.
Whose talks
Dr.
I'm missing
Fauci,
at the
you've
American
spent
Society for
5
Virology meeting
decades
right now
in public service,
to stand up for
including
them.
nearly 4
for us
decades
all.
in leadership at the National Institutes of Health, helping to conquer COVID-19, but also HIV, swine flu, Zika, Ebola, and other epidemics with real-life results saving human lives. Put aside all the flowery rhetoric that we hear in the United States Senate. Dr. Fauci has saved lives, as
He
have
has.
public health officials in the United States and throughout the world. And today, we are demeaning and degrading their life-saving service.
We're degrading the entire
Republicans are eager to
scientific
rebrand
enterprise that made
you as a
America
villain
great, that
in order
saved
to
millions
distract
of
from their
lives,
own failure to protect Americans from
and that's upheld our
soaring healthcare
democracy and
costs.
kept our position in the
They've
world.
been rising astronomically in the last couple of years. And from unsafe food, which has caused cyclospora to spread, and resurgent
Salmonella,
measles
too.
as a result of the anti-vaccine policy. This hearing is the culmination of a years-long crusade, which started more than 6 years ago when Dr. Fauci dared to contradict President Trump.
Indeed.
The campaign to vilify you, Dr. Fauci, is just one part of this larger campaign against science
And against
and facts,
America.
a campaign that has made Americans less safe. It is shameful that in a country like ours, a dedicated public service like Dr. Fauci has experienced persistent threats to his life since the pandemic because of the lies that are told about him. His attorney has been gagged, thrown out of this hearing room.
For being unruly in asserting his
But
client's constitutional rights.
He has written a letter to the chairman that is an explanation for the reasons why Dr. Fauci is, in fact, invoking his constitutional right. It is a right.
Yes, it
And
is.
I would ask that this letter from David Schertler and Danny Onato be made a part of the record if there's
Without
no objection.
It sounds like two attorneys, not a half
His
dozen.
attorney has
Rand
also
Paul.
issued a statement within the last half hour, I believe, that sets forth, again, the reasons that he is here to help protect his client's rights. And I would ask that that statement be made part of the record as well, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Let's be very clear. The Fifth Amendment is a right of everyone appearing before an authority like this one.
Indeed.
It should
sure
be
is.
respected.
Not only should it be respected, it needs
And
to be respected
the
by
reason
law. It's the law of the
that
land.
Dr. Fauci has invoked it, in the words of his attorney, quote, during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Fauci appeared at least a dozen times for congressional hearings in the Senate alone in answer to questions about the very issues on which you purport to seek information. He has been thoroughly transparent and consistent in providing factual information to Congress, and he is deeply familiar with the processes and protocols of sharing information with the legislative branch. And then referring to the chairman, this years-long public crusade against Dr. Fauci makes one thing clear. This is not a serious effort to seek information from Dr. Fauci in a transcribed interview for a valid legislative purpose. You are single-mindedly fixated on Dr. Fauci, seeing Dr. Fauci prosecuted for imaginary crimes, and you are so invested in that outcome that you have created a personal brand around it. Those are the words of his attorney.
He has created a personal brand
And
around
he
it.
cites as well
Go look at his Twitter.
the statements of the chairman, which indicate a clear intent that the result of this proceeding be a prosecution. Quote, the power of some of us must be used for good, like putting Fauci in jail. That's from December 23, 2025. I want to give him a subpoena and a jail cell, also from December of 2025. The first was 2024. Those kinds of statements by the chairman of a committee in tweets certainly provide a well-founded fear that the proceeding underway is simply an effort to trap Dr. Fauci in some kind of criminal wrongdoing.
Literally, Rand Paul has been so clear about
That
his
is not the
desire to
purpose
do this for
of a
years
congressional
and
hearing.
years
It's not
and
the
years,
valid
just like
purpose of a
Blumenthal just
congressional
said.
hearing. During some of the dark days in this body, under Senator Joe McCarthy, it became standard operating procedure to seek that kind of prosecutorial objective.
Misconduct
We should not be part of a rerun
of the Red
of that
Scare.
kind of effort. This attempt to rebrand one of the most challenging times in our nation's history is a short-sighted act of desperation that will leave us less prepared for the next pandemic. It is an insult to the memory of more than 1 million Americans who died from COVID-19.
It sure is.
If there are valid scientific questions about the origins of this pandemic, COVID-19, about the kinds of steps that were taken to counter it, about the need for more preparation, they should certainly be addressed, but not in a show trial,
Exactly.
not as part of a continuing vendetta against a single individual.
Indeed.
And unfortunately, I fear that is what we are seeing
Who
today.
is going to be used
America deserves better.
as a
Thank you,
template
Mr.
for
Chairman.
doing this to many other individuals.
In no courtroom in America can you have your witness plead the Fifth Amendment, and then your attorney gets to testify. That's what that letter is. The attorney's
shut the fuck
complaining
up,
and
Rand Paul.
testifying, saying, he didn't do it, the prosecution's unfair. You don't get to do that. That's one thing you give up when you take the Fifth Amendment. You say, I'm not going to testify. I'm not going to give you any information. You don't then get to put your lawyer forward to justify it. He can do it in the press, but you can't come and testify. He was not invited to
did do it in the
testify.
press, and he
was out
didn't
of order,
testify.
and it was appropriate to have him
And you
ejected.
booted him. And you're also
So-
mocking Fauci for exercising his
Paul, thank you for doing
constitutional
this.
rights.
I think,
So your
I know in
opinion
my
on
state,
this,
people
Rand
have
Paul,
been asking
is
questions about Dr. Fauci
ignored by me.
for years. So Dr.
Oh,
Fauci,
boy.
your entry has made clear that you love being the hero, a
Oh,
celebrity,
for God's
and
sake.
you're having the eyes of the world upon you.
He's
You
got a
love
big
every
ego, so
newspaper
what?
profile, every photo shoot, every fancy dinner with the elites. To
Yeah,
many
you're one
Americans
to
who
talk,
lost
Rick
family
Scott.
members, who lost trust in our federal government, you're not a hero. Unfortunately, you're a villain. You made yourself the story
Says Lex
and abandoned
Luthor,
the American
like,
people to
on
serve your own
Ozempic.
ego.
Shut
To
up,
begin,
Rick
I'd like to
Scott.
talk about your relationship with David
That's
Moraes.
one of the worst.
He was
He is so
the
corrupt.
senior advisor in the NIAID, Office of the Director, your office for 16 years. He was your friend. He was a frequent guest at your house. You reportedly co-authored over 50 scientific articles with him.
Yeah, what's
You
the
turned
matter
to
with
him
having
first,
friends?
right after COVID-19 first occurred. Earlier this year, the Department of Justice charged him with conspiracy against the United States, in addition to other charges as part of a conspiracy to conceal information and falsify records to suppress
So I was a
alternative
witness to
theories
that
about the
crime,
origins
and I'm
of
friends with
COVID-19.
David Moraes too.
Now,
Not as
you've
good as
publicly
Fauci.
kicked this
But,
man to the curb, saying
I've gotten
Dr.
one of those
Moraes
emails.
was
It's like,
not an advisor to me on
don't,
institute
you know,
policy
use
or
David's
other substantive
NIH
issues.
email, use the Gmail.
So let's start
because
with
we
the
were
use of
essentially
personal
talking
Gmail
shit
accounts
about another
and Dave
colleague
Moran's
who's
relationship
actually
with Peter
mentioned
Daszak.
in some of the documents that Rand Paul has put
David
out.
Moran's tells Peter
who
Daszak,
basically has a
president of Equal
vendetta
Alliance,
against
and
Chinese
you've got this in front of you, it's Exhibit
and,
1.
we were talking
It's in,
about
it's already in the record as part of
and
this.
put
It
out
says,
a
quote,
preprint that
PS,
was not very good.
I forgot to say that there is no worry about FOIA. I can either send stuff to Tony on his private Gmail or hand it to him at work or as house. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble.
Look, I'm not defending this behavior.
Dr.
from
Fauci,
David
did Dr.
Moran's
Moran's
or from
relationship
Tony
with Peter
Fauci,
Daszak
if
concern you?
Tony Fauci
Yes
was
or no?
part of that. But at the same time, David Moran's a
On the
78-year-old
advice of counsel, I respectfully
fantastic
decline to answer
epidemiologist,
based upon my rights
And
under the Fifth
he-
Amendment to the Constitution.
and Tony
Did
probably
David Moran's ever
want to
bring
produce
documents
more
to your
evidence
house?
for show trials like this in the future.
On the
felt
advice
it
of
could create
counsel, I
political
respectfully
problems
decline
have
to answer based
frank,
upon my rights under
candid
the Fifth Amendment
conversations
to the
with your colleagues and
Constitution.
friends.
Do you ever
So I'm
receive
not
a text
defending
about
it,
your work at
public servant.
NIAID to your personal
Do you
cell
have
phone?
public records request, like
On the advice of
you have
counsel, I
Wi-Fi?
respectfully decline to
However,
answer based upon my
Does David
rights under
Moran's
the
deserve
Fifth Amendment to the
58 years in federal
Constitution.
prison for doing this?
Did any text about
Because
your work at
basically
NID
wanted
that went to
to
your
blow
personal
off
cell
some
phone ever
steam
become
about
part of federal
frustration
records?
about all the lab leak stuff.
On the advice of counsel, I
It's just out of
respectfully decline
control.
to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you maintain a personal email account while serving as director?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to
Yeah.
the
None of
Constitution.
your fucking business.
Did you ever receive work-related communications on that Gmail account from David Moran's?
None of your business.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you preserve any work-related communications on that Gmail account from David Moran's?
On the advice of counsel,
Oh
I
my
respectfully
God.
decline to answer based upon my rights under the
Yeah,
Fifth
I mean,
Amendment to the
this
Constitution.
is why it's very good.
Did
I
David
think
Moran's
that
ever
Fauci
provide you with
exists.
documents outside of those
Because
two
this
ways
kind
that
of
would
stuff is
violate
trying to
NIH
link
policy
Fauci
for
directly
FOIA
to the
compliance?
crime that, David has been
On the
charged
advice of
with.
counsel, I
And
respectfully decline to
He's trying
answer
to
based
basically
upon
make
my rights
Fauci, I guess, the
under the Fifth
co-conspirator in
Amendment to the
David's
Constitution.
case.
Now let's look at two other communications. You emailed Dave Moran's on January 26, 2020, quote, "It is important that I speak with you tonight. Please call me at home." This is the part of Exhibit 2 that you have in front of you. This email is sent the same day, the exact same day you write in an internal document, quote, Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier, unquote. Would you call the origins of COVID-19 a substantive issue?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer
I guess
based
Rick
upon
Scott
my
is
rights under
implying
the
that
Fifth Amendment to the
what Tony wanted
Constitution.
to talk to David about.
Did
was
you
the fact
discuss
that secretly
COVID-19 origins
the
with
lab
David
leak,
Moran's
how
on
they're
this
gonna
phone
cover it up.
call?
I guarantee that's not
On
what
the
we
advice of
discussed on this phone
counsel,
call.
I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now let's take a closer look at the last time you testified before Congress. This is part of what you have in front of you is Exhibit 4, which is part of the record. In June 2024, you testified to Dr. Moran's, quote, was not an advisor to me on institute policy or other substantive issues. Furthermore, his office is located in a different building from that of the NIAID director, unquote. Is that still your testimony today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under
David
the
Morans
Fifth
was
Amendment
the
to the
senior advisor
Constitution.
to Tony Fauci.
So today, under oath, your testimony
That means
remains
he
that
gives
Dr.
advice.
Morans was not an
The
advisor
fact
to you
is,
on
David
institute
Moran's
policy or
job
substantive
was not
matters.
to make policy. And I think that's what
On the
Tony's
advice of
referring
counsel,
to.
I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now, I've got Exhibit 5, which you have in front of you. On October 24, 2021, David Morans texted you to provide information about and advocate for the controversial EcoHealth Alliance grant. You thank him and tell him that you will check the information. Would you agree that this shows an advisory relationship between David Morans and yourself?
His
On the
job
advice
title
of
was
counsel,
literally
I
senior
respectfully
advisor
decline
to
to
the
answer
director.
based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the
This is so
Constitution.
dumb. Tony
Do you
was
agree that
telling
you two
him
were
the
discussing a
scope
substantive
literally
issue?
of David Moran's advisory responsibilities.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to
But
answer
David Morans
based upon
was
my
supposed
rights
to be an
under the
advisor to
Fifth
Tony
Amendment to the
Fauci. His job
Constitution.
title was,
The
again, literally
documentary
senior
evidence
advisor to the
establishes that
director.
Dr. Morans advised
And you know
you
how I
regarding
know that?
EcoHealth
It
Alliance,
was on
COVID
his
origins, and
email,
grant
some of the
policy.
ones that he
Then your
did
June
send me from his
2024
NIH
testimony
account.
would have been inaccurate, correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully
You can read the
decline
FOIA
to answer
emails.
based
Don't
upon
believe
my
me.
rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Is there any document in your possession today that would contradict your prior congressional testimony?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Have you deleted, destroyed, or instructed anyone to destroy records after learning Congress is investigating these matters?
I love this. They're just going from one Republican
On the
to
advice
next,
of
being like,
counsel,
did
I
you commit this
respectfully
crime?
decline
Did you
to
commit this
answer
crime?
based
Did you
upon
commit
my
this crime?
rights
Did you
under the
commit this
Fifth
crime?
Amendment to the Constitution.
Are you aware of anyone
And
who
somehow
did?
Tony Fauci is not falling all over himself to be like,
On the
so
advice of
sorry, I
counsel, I
committed all these
respectfully
crimes.
decline
Please
to
put me
answer
behind
based
bars.
upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What is the
As
matter
you know,
with
Dr.
these
Morans
people?
now faces charges related to destroying records while you distance yourself from him. Is that fair to a decades-long friend?
On the advice of counsel, I
No, he's being-
respectfully
he's a
decline to
bad
answer
friend,
based
too.
upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
When is the last
Tony
time you
has to
spoke to
distance
him?
himself from everybody.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
In hindsight, are you disappointed how you handled COVID? Do you have any regrets?
On the advice of counsel,
You
I
commit
respectfully decline to
XYZ,
answer based
a
upon
bunch
my
of
rights
different
under the
crimes so
Fifth
that we can
Amendment
charge
to
you
the
with them, and then
Constitution.
any regrets?
Dr. Fauci, I want to close with this. Here's how you impacted my family and people close to me. I have
Oh.
daughters with children. You can't imagine the questions they had around vaccines for their kids and themselves.
Oh, so your
And the
daughters are
pressure,
anti-vaxxers,
the
and that's
unbelievable
been so
pressure
hard
to
for
make the
you.
right decision for their health. I can tell you pregnant women who worked with me were so scared because every time they went to the doctor, they were told something different about taking the vaccine. And you caused this. Imagine being a mom trying to protect their kids or an expectant mother trying to figure out what to do. Every 3 weeks, a doctor tells you a new set of guidance on a vaccine. The haphazard information you released and pushed on the American people with little research
Fauci
is
does not
appalling.
make vaccine guidance.
And why there's so
That would
little,
be
there's
from the
so much
CDC,
distrust in our institutions
the
today.
Advisory Committee on
That trust
Immunization
is
Practices
crucial to
makes
public health,
vaccine
and you, more than any person
recommendations, not
or event
Fauci.
in my
He also doesn't
lifetime,
approve
have
vaccines,
destroyed that trust for
authorize
millions
them,
of
or
Americans.
issue licenses for anything.
You
That's
lied
the
to hundreds of
FDA.
millions of people
Rick
amid
Scott
the worst
lying
public
to
health
you
crisis
about
in
the
the
way that the
century.
government works.
You
because
failed to
none of the
follow your own
things
guidance.
He's mad about
You
with
forced
vaccine
people to watch their loved
are
ones
things
die
that Fauci's
alone over the
actually
phone. It's
responsible for.
disgusting. You destroyed the federal government's credibility when it comes to public health.
He did not.
We have entire generations
You
of
did that,
Americans who
Rick Scott,
rightfully
by
so
lying
do
about
not trust our
everything that
institutions
Fauci
to
did and
keep people safe
everything that
because of
happened during the
you.
pandemic.
This has destroyed decades of progress and lifetimes of work because
Wrong.
you wanted to fuel your own
You're
ego and
destroying
be
it,
the
Rick
center of
Scott,
attention.
by all of these lies. It's
What
not
would you do
because Tony
differently
Fauci
knowing what
wants
you
to
know
be the
today,
center of
Dr. Fauci?
attention, or he's a bad friend to David Lawrence. It's
On the
because you're
advice of
lying about
counsel,
all
I
of that.
respectfully decline to
You're lying
answer
about
based
what you're
upon my
doing to
rights
the
under the
government.
Fifth Amendment to
You're
the
lying about the
Constitution.
fact that we should have
All the evidence is
constitutional
right
rights,
here, and you
Fauci
still
is
can't bring yourself
absolutely
to
right
tell the
speak
truth
that
or
to you.
apologize because you received an auto-pin pardon from a staffer in the Biden White House. If we have
Bullshit.
another pandemic tomorrow, millions could die because of what you did. What you
No.
did to make Americans lose trust in their
Millions will
government
die
when
because
it
of
comes to
what you're
medicine
doing
and
right now,
healthcare.
Rick Scott. If
How
we have
many
another
families have you
pandemic tomorrow,
apologized to had to
it's
watch
not
their
Fauci's
loved
fault that
ones
the
die
government
alone?
has been crippled
You breached
and
public
completely
trust, and
unable
now you're hiding
to
behind a
respond to
fraudulent pardon.
anything, including the
Your
psychiatric
legacy will not be as a man who that saved America from
Your
COVID,
legacy
but as a man
will
who
be as a
destroyed the
fascist
public
simp
trust
who
in America's
destroyed
public
American
health institutions
democracy.
in exchange
You
for
and
5
all
minutes
of
of
your
fame.
Republican
This
colleagues,
is how
Rick
history will
Scott.
remember you. I yield back.
That's how history will remember
Senator
you
Kim.
as somebody who undid America and ushered in totalitarianism.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for coming on out in front of this committee. I know it's not what you would want. It's not what you deserve. I just want to say and start by just saying thank you to you for your service to this nation. I didn't know much about you prior to the pandemic. I came to learn about you from however many Americans did, but I also had the opportunity to talk to you and engage with you as someone who is a member of the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis over in the House of Representatives. When I learned about your background, 38 years as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, appointed by President Reagan, served under 7 presidents, 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. I admire that greatly. I myself had a chance to serve in the executive branch, serve in government under both a Republican president and a Democratic president. And I believe that we need more of that type of work, a place where we can understand our jobs not as coming from a place of partisanship and politics, but that of just public service. And right now, I feel the hyperpartisanship growing in this country in dangerous ways. I feel it much more present here on the Hill than I did back when I served as a nonpartisan career public servant at the State Department. And I worry about it. I worry about what kind of trajectory we're on as a country and what this causes when it comes next for public service and those willing to step up for our nation. And it's not just in the attacks, but we see it brought out with the cuts to funding, to the firing of federal workers, to the demonization of their motivations, people calling our public servants criminals, thinking that they are there solely to undermine others that are trying to engage. And I look at it right now. You know, it's not just that the people are being attacked, our public servants being attacked, but that it's undermining the very nature of the work of governance. You know, these cuts to HHS funding, to NIH funding, to the grants, cuts to the researchers doing the critical work to find cures and medicines. These firing and these cuts, they're creating a chilling effect, honestly, a chilling effect for the next generation of people who might consider stepping up to serve our nation, to be the next generation of researchers who now are wondering whether or not this is the right thing for them to do at a time when they see some of their colleagues or those that they looked up to being attacked, their funding being cut. Researchers that I talk to who are now either leaving the country or considering leaving the country to do their work because of the sheer unpredictability of America. That this nation so great, so powerful has now been crippled with this sense of unpredictability and unreliability. That is not the type of country that I hope we strive to be. I've raised this because these attacks upon Dr. Fauci, it's not just about him. It's sending signals to others who are thinking about serving our country, our scientists, our doctors, our healthcare professionals, our researchers, trying to show to them that if you don't get in line with the politics, that you will also potentially be subject to attacks.
That is 100% correct.
And from
And
the
not
work
only
that
that,
he
it's
has
subject to
done from
prosecution.
HIV/AIDS to Ebola to COVID, you know, we've seen him try to engage in these crises. They're not easy, especially when it's a novel disease, when you don't know what comes next, a lot of unknowns, having to make decisions without the full breadth of knowledge we always wish we had in hindsight. But there is nothing perfect, no perfect clarity when it comes to pandemics, when it comes to crises. I worked in national security and wars and crises. I made judgment calls, gave my best advice to generals, to ambassadors, even to a president. Did I get it all right? No.
Indeed.
Did I do my best? I did everything I thought I could with the information that I had.
That's what we all can do.
The public servants, they do this work because they love this country and that they strive to improve it. It's not an easy job, but it is because there is so much at stake in our country. But these public servants do it because they are in the arena. I just want to end by just reading a portion of this because I think it's important as we're thinking about how to be able to treat public servants through this country, to think through this. And in the words of Teddy Roosevelt saying, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strive valiantly, who errs but comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumphs of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you for your service, Dr. Fauci. I yield back.
Senator Alling.
That was beautiful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, nothing says honesty like taking the fifth, huh, Doc?
Oh, fucking A.
Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
This is so obnoxious.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon.
All right, after this bullshit, I'm going to probably have to step off. I actually have a news hit on News Nation to talk about this very hearing, and I think that it is still important to that. I also am not sure that we're going to get much more out of this because right now Josh Hawley is asking him what color the carpet is, what color his tie is, and he's just making Fauci take the fifth over and over again.
It's under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt.
Showing solidarity with the traitors who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Never, ever forget that. This is a sitting U.S. senator who supported people who were trying to overthrow our government.
You did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic, you got rich, didn't you? You got rich. While people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees
from all of your lobbying,
taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. Cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
Oh, that's a little bit different than what color is my tie.
To answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
When you get
you remember Greg
prizes,
who was that?
Awards, things like that. Sometimes they come with honoraria. Sometimes when you give a talk, you get an honorarium for giving it.
Fifth Amendment to the
It's pretty normal.
Your chief of staff.
I don't pull in $1 million,
remember Patricia
but
Conrad?
I do actually get paid sometimes for giving talks or getting awards or that kind of thing. Usually they do come with a cash prize.
And what were these individuals doing in the depth of the pandemic in November of 2020? When millions of Americans were suffering from COVID, what were they doing? I tell you what they're doing. Folkers was on your behalf soliciting and gathering information for a cash award. Let's look at it. We've got his email right here, right over my shoulder.
Greg Folkers.
Volker says, I'm working on this nomination for the Dan David Award for Fauci. We need to beef up the COVID part. Do you have language in the can that you could share that delineates how we responded in new ways to COVID.
Oh,
He
that was
sends
my
this
birthday.
to multiple federal employees. What was the Dan David Award? Do you remember, Doc?
On the advice of counsel, I
It is also
respectfully
not
decline
uncommon
answer
to
based
have
upon
a
my rights under
nomination
the
for
Fifth
an
Amendment
award,
to the
especially for
Constitution.
somebody
It
at
was a
Fauci's level.
$900,000 cash award.
It is not unusual for somebody to solicit
cash
nominations
award.
from
And he
that
got it.
person.
Because he used
Get
federal
somebody to nominate you,
employees to
and
get
then you
it.
get
And
the
this
award.
wasn't the
It's
only
because
award,
initially,
was it,
the
Dr.
award
Fauci?
giving,
In fact, you applied
award
for and
giver
received at least 8
reached
other
out
federal
and asked you
cash prizes
for a
on
nomination
federal
so that
time
you could get the
using
award.
federal employees and federal
And
resources.
I know this because
Here
I
they are over
also
my
sit
shoulder.
on an awards board.
Besides the Dan
for a
David
little
Award,
bit
you've got the
of-
Partnership for Public Service, you've got the Adelson Prize, you've got the
we have to have an
Smithsonian Award, you've got the National Academy of Medicine's Award, you've got the CDC
nominated
Foundation. In fact,
by somebody
you
else.
turn your staff
we
into a
solicit
full-time application machine. You actually
case, they
wrote
don't
to
get $1 million.
people and
They
said,
just get a
do you
free
think
trip
maybe I'd
for
qualify?
conferences. But
And you got cash for all of this. And it
it's not
wasn't just one
uncommon.
or two
The
employees,
point is,
was it?
it's
In
not
fact, you
uncommon
used 8 separate
for these
federal
large awards.
employees on
They
federal
also
time
applying
using
for a
federal
grant.
resources to solicit cash awards. Isn't that true?
On the advice of
also
counsel, I
benefits the
respectfully
NIH
decline to
greatly
answer based
because
upon
you
my
have a
rights under the
decorated
Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here they are right
of
over
the
my
NIH
shoulder. Here's all of them. The people
There's
that
nothing
you
wrong with having
use
these
federal
awards.
employees so that you could go and get cash money. And the most hilarious part
Cash
is that
money.
you weren't content to even dragoon them into applying for all of these cash awards. You then had them go out to the ethics agencies and ethics watchdogs and demand that you be able to get the money. That's right. We've got it in your emails. Your staff and employees on federal time, using federal resources, being paid with federal dollars, are soliciting cash for you. And then they're turning around and saying to the agency, we don't want just an answer. We want to get to yes, because Fauci wants the money. He wants it. We want to get to yes, and yes takes time. This is your chief of staff again, using federal email.
yes, it does
To pressure
take time.
the agency's own
Do
ethics
conflict of
people
interest
so that
settings to
you
make
could
sure
get
that
money,
impact
so that
this
you could get
money is
rich.
ethical.
And it violated
Because
the law.
it's allowed,
Didn't
and it is
Dr. Fauci?
ethical, but you have to go through the
Didn't
ethics
it?
process. And again,
violated
there
the
is
law, didn't
nothing
it?
wrong with your staff managing that. That is a normal
It is a
part
question. You can
of
answer. Go ahead.
someone's job.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Federal law, as you very well know, prohibits the solicitation of cash awards or other personal benefits for federal employees. And it certainly prohibits
not
using
soliciting a
your
personal
own
cash award.
employees to do this.
He's
5
completely
CFR section
mischaracterizing all of these things.
2635205B.
Oh,
It says it
205?
right there in black and white. You cannot
Wonder how many
use
times he practiced
federal
that.
resources, federal dollars, federal employees, federal offices, federal email, federal time to solicit cash awards, and you did all
Powerful,
of it. And
Josh,
the worst
just
part
like when you
is
did this
thousands
to
of
the
people were
January
dying while you were
6ers.
doing it. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor, and you were playing one on TV, but this is what you were doing with your time. Isn't
You were playing a
that
January
true?
6th trigger on TV, except you weren't really playing, were you? You do support
On the
them.
advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah,
Nice
I can see why. I
I
can
can
certainly see why. You know what I
Wow.
can't quite figure out is that why you were so obsessed with it, because you're already rich. I mean, and your scheme worked here. I mean, your net worth now is north of $12 million. You got over $1 million in cash awards during
It's like
COVID,
watching Patrick
during
Bateman
a
from American
12-month,
Psycho try to
24-month
hold
span
high
during
ground
COVID.
over
$1
somebody.
million you knocked down in cash money using federal resources. Now you're worth more than $12 million. You've got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year. 1 million people dead.
How
You're
much is your
getting
salary,
rich.
Josh
1
Hawley?
million people dead. You're using federal employees
How many
to get
tax
cash
breaks
awards
you
for
got
you.
for
1 million
awards?
people dead, and you're here taking the fifth
How many
because you don't want to admit
special
that what
dinners
really
and
happened in all that
trips and
time was a
gratuities
multi-month, multi-year
Gifts
course of
and things have you gotten from
self-dealing.
donors,
Isn't that true, Dr. Fauci?
political allies, from lobbyists?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, well, silence is admission. And here's the real thing.
No, it's not,
At the end of the
actually.
day, it wasn't just about
Silence
the money,
is a
really, was it?
constitutional
It
right
was
as
really
well.
about a power trip.
You have a right
I mean,
not
through
to
all of
incriminate
this,
yourself.
you want to be the most famous scientist
even
in
though
the world.
Fauci's
You were
done
so
nothing
focused on getting every
incriminating.
award and every drop of cash that you
Fauci has
could.
done nothing
all
wrong.
because you wanted to be on TV. You wanted to be the sun god of science.
Who cares
you
if he
wanted to be
wanted
the
to be
guy
the
who was in
sun
charge of
god
it
of
all. You wanted
science?
to blambaste Trump.
The fact
you
is, he
wanted to
hasn't
make
done
sure that
anything
nobody
wrong,
else
and he
stole
has
your
a right
spotlight.
to
You
stop
wanted to
these
be the
people
guy.
who are making things up.
You had time to sit for
Completely
InStyle
making
magazine.
things up, making it seem
Here's
like
what you were doing
sitting
your
for
time. You could sit
InStyle
for InStyle
magazine is a
magazine.
crime. This is
But
not
you
a
can't
crime.
answer questions for the American people. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you're here taking
He has
the
every
fifth.
right not
you
to
could
answer
sit for
questions
InStyle
for the
magazine and get
American
$1
people when
million
those
bucks in
questions
cash
are making a
awards.
mockery
But
of
now
our
the cat's
Senate,
got your tongue.
of our judicial system,
he does.
of our democracy.
I tell you what, here's my
So you know
conclusion
what?
from all
I don't
this.
give a shit about this
This was
stupid
really all
picture on
about you the whole
InStyle
time.
magazine.
Somewhere along
This
the
is
way,
legal.
you lost
it's
your
not
way.
a crime. I don't
You
care
may
if
have been a
Fauci
good public
lost his
servant
way.
at
I
one
don't
time.
care
I
if
don't
Fauci
know.
had a
But I
big
can
ego.
tell you
I
from
don't
reading
care if
your
he was
emails
thrilled to
now,
meet
from
celebrities.
looking
I
at
don't
what you
care if he
did, how
likes
you
being on
used your
TV.
employees.
Personally,
Somewhere
I
along the
don't.
line, it
I
became
suspect that
all
he probably
about
didn't either.
you.
I
You
suspect he
became a
very much doesn't
narcissist
like being on
and a
TV today.
megalomaniac and a liar.
He's not a
And
narcissist
you've
and a
lied to the American
megalomaniac,
people,
but
and
even
you've
if he
lied to
were,
this body.
has he committed
And
a
you've
crime?
disgraced your
He has
profession
not
by
committed a
doing it. You
crime.
called yourself the most famous
Has he
scientist in the
committed
world.
a crime?
You've done more to harm
He has not
science
committed
than
a
anybody in
crime.
my lifetime.
He has not
And I hope
harmed
you'll go
science.
home and write that in your diary. Thank you,
I
Mr.
hope,
Chairman.
I hope we get a look at your
Senator Fetterman.
diaries one day, Josh Hawley, as well as your emails.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Chairman.
that we can see who you've been
Dr.
corresponding
Fauci,
with.
I'm not here
And
to
about what?
perhaps attack you or defend or anything. It's really just more, honestly, I just want to acknowledge I have had members of my family die from COVID, and now I also grieve for people that I've met that have
Okay,
lost
guys.
their
We're on
business
Fetterman, though,
through
at this point,
the
and
pandemic, and they'll never been the same.
I'm not sure how much more of
Now,
this I
as
can take, and I'm
during the
supposed to
pandemic,
be
I was the lieutenant governor, so we were
logging
in the
into
middle
this
of
News Nation
all
thing.
of that maelstrom.
So I think I
trying
might
to find
end
the right balance
this
between
hearing
protect
coverage
life
for the
and
moment.
protect the
I'm not
economics.
sure how much more we're
for
going to
all
get
of it.
out of it.
And I'm not
I
sure
don't
if
know.
we got it all
I
right.
do
or
have a
wrong,
lot of people who seem to be
but
very
without a doubt,
engaged,
I
but at the
can
same time, most
continue
of the
to
comments I'm seeing
question
are that this
myself.
is such a
But
bogus
one that
hearing,
I-
which in fact it
it's not
is.
about much more
And I
your
do think
regrets,
that we've
but
kind
I
of gone
have one.
over everything
And
that we could
is
possibly go
early
over.
on
Although I'm curious
that
to hear John
there
Fetterman's
was
regret.
the theory that the
Maybe that
virus
he's a
could have
total
emerged
putz
from
who
the
lied
lab.
to all of his
And
constituents about what he was
early
going to
on,
do
that
when he got
became
elected.
Like a right-wing kinds of theory.
Oh, boy.
And I thought it seemed to make sense. Now, there was a really advanced
Okay,
lab
John
that was
Fetterman's
close
belief
by,
in the
and
lab
then you
leak.
have this unknown virus out. So,
I'll
but
give him
that
one more
became a
minute.
very partisan thing. And now it seems now it's more and more emerging theory that would have come from the lab.
No, it's
Now,
not an emerging
you know,
theory,
I
you
hope,
moron.
I
It is
think that
absolutely
the next
not. You
time
shouldn't be
our
talking about
nation's
things that you
facing
don't
something like
understand.
this, we are not become, you know, as I might have been, blinded by the partisan idea that maybe the truth might come from a side that's different than you are. But I think we should really be willing to pursue truth.
Yes, we all know
matter
how
where
nonpartisan
that
you
may
are.
have emerged, you know, for all of that. So, and I now cede the remain back to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure that was a question. All right. I think I'm going to cut this right now because this hearing has really just been a disinformation fest with some good stuff from the Democrats coming in occasionally, with the exception of John Fetterman's incoherent ramble there at the end. I hope that everybody really gets the take-home message that this was just really a straight disinformation campaign. And the purpose of this, of course, as the Democrats correctly noted, is to entrap Fauci in either a lie. They seem to be trying to get him to admit to crimes or to deny them and then, quote, commit perjury, as Rand Paul introduced at the beginning of this hearing. So it was absolutely right for Tony to take the fifth for the entire hearing, because it was pretty obvious that no matter what he said, the Republicans were going to try to use it against him to, in fact, prosecute him. And the end game here is that, and what everybody needs to understand is that prosecuting Fauci is not about Fauci entirely. For Rand Paul, it might be, but prosecuting Fauci is about setting the precedent to prosecute anybody who has a political opinion that is different from yours on the basis of made up stuff about science, with the understanding that people don't understand the science well enough to push back and to object to people being essentially railroaded for crimes that they didn't commit. So everybody really does need to pay attention to this, because if Fauci is successfully prosecuted, that says very, very bad things for our entire democracy and all of our individual constitutional rights. It certainly says bad things about science. And again, I'm at the American Society for Virology annual meeting right now. Boy, is this a grim environment. My colleagues are really scared because our field faces an existential threat, and so does all of science, which means that our country will be less safe and less secure because we won't have any of that research that Tony Fauci funded that created all of those vaccines and drugs that have saved so many lives. And with that, I'm going to sign off, and thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm going to set up a recap episode of this later on. I'm hoping to have a special guest who can talk with great expertise about gain of function research and who knows Tony Fauci personally. And we'll see about that. But I'll let you guys know about that. And stay tuned. I'm going to be on News Nation in a few minutes. Bye-bye.